is the largest executive common security and defence policy operation. With this 10th ShadeMed conference, IRINI is upholding a tradition. Through ShadeMed, we aim to share knowledge and interest, paramount to contributing to peace and stability in the wider Mediterranean. In this two-day conference, you will have the possibility to follow 4 panel discussions and presentations from various actors involved in the region. Moreover, ShadeMed also lives from your input. Most of you have registered to participate in one of 3 working groups, where you will actively discuss one of the 3 topics. In addition, we invite you to send us your questions during the panel discussions so that they can be addressed during the question and answers session. Please email your questions to polad1@euohq.defesa.it. That's Papa Oscar Lima Alpha Delta 1 at Echo Uniform Oscar Hotel Quebec .defesa Delta India Foxtrot Echo Sierra Alpha .it India Tango. You will find this email address in the technical connection instructions, which you should have already received. This morning, we will listen to a keynote address by Mr. Charles Fries, Deputy Secretary General for the Common Security and Defence Policy, CSDP, and Crisis Response of the European External Action Service. Tomorrow morning, Vice Admiral Didier Piéton, Deputy Commander of Allied Maritime Command of the NATO MARCOM, and General Claudio Graziano, Chairman of the EU Military Committee, as well as Mr. John Manza, Assistant Secretary General for Operations of NATO, will also deliver keynote speeches. During this first day of ShadeMed, we will have 3 panel sessions. The first panel will discuss the EU's role in building an inclusive security architecture for the Mediterranean basin. The second focuses on building a better people-centered policy in the region. The third and last one today will address ways to enhance economic recovery and prosperity in the Mediterranean. Tomorrow, there will be another panel discussion on NATO's approach to maritime security. All times on the programme are Central European summertime, so it is now almost 9:30 in the morning. This afternoon, the 3 working groups will begin their work at 15:30 hours and resume their discussions at 0900 hours tomorrow morning. Their outcomes and policy recommendations will be presented tomorrow in a plenary session at 14:15 hours. I wish you a great start to this edition of ShadeMed. Tomorrow morning will be dedicated to the working groups, and at 1100 hours, we will resume our meeting in the plenary format. So let's kick off with a welcome address by Rear Admiral Stefano Turchetto. Sir, you have the floor.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege to welcome you all to the 10th edition of the Shared Awareness and Deconfliction in the Mediterranean Conference, the first time IRINI is hosting ShadeMed together with NATO Maritime Command. This event allows all the people connected to reflect about the challenges and opportunities of the region and possible future perspectives. Far more than a simple international meeting, the ShadeMed conference represents a unique opportunity to meet, to exchange good practices, and to share information and experiences among many and different actors involved in the Mediterranean area. Allow me to mention a few key facts on EUNAVFOR Med IRINI. It is operating right at the heart of the Mediterranean Sea, with the main task of supporting the implementation of the United Nations arms embargo on Libya, but also to contribute to the reduction of illegal oil smuggling, human trafficking, and train the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy. IRINI is only one component of a process involving political, military, economic, and humanitarian tracks agreed upon at the Berlin Conference on Libya of early 2020. This process represents the European Union's truly holistic approach to the solution of the long-lasting conflict in Libya. We work day by day in order to guarantee stability and security in the central Mediterranean, remaining equidistant from all the involved parties. The EU mandate for Irini was renewed in March by 2 years until 2023. The UN Security Council also acknowledged the value of the work carried out by Irini in June, when it extended by 1 year Resolution 2292 that allows Irini to conduct offshore inspection on board suspect vessels. While Irini demonstrates the EU's ability to act, the SHEDMED conference is a clear example of the EU's willingness to effectively address the challenges and opportunities of the Mediterranean region, including social, economic, and security issues. It's an open forum where everybody can express their opinions in a constructive manner to demonstrate that freedom of expressions and dialogue are fundamental values of the entire EU community. This year's conference theme is Sharing Security, Culture, and Values for a Shared Prosperity in the Med. The topics we will discuss today and tomorrow show that SHEDMED fully reflects the EU's comprehensive approach. We will begin with a focus on security, asking how the EU can facilitate dialogue between the regional actors, as well as step up its own effort for security in the region. Our second panel will look specifically at ways to improve the human rights situation in the wider Mediterranean. In the afternoon, we will exchange thoughts on ways to improve the region's economic situation. Thereafter and tomorrow morning, the working groups will begin their discussions. I'm very much looking forward to an interactive exchange on training and capacity building, new challenges for maritime security, as well as human security. I'm positive that these issues will perfectly complement the topics of the panels, and we will have the privilege to listen to each working group summary at the end of the conference. My wish to the working groups is that in the summary tomorrow, they will present concrete policy recommendations that we are able to send to the EU institution in our report on SHEDMED. It's a pleasure for me to announce that Markham is in charge of the second day of our conference. The fourth level panel will reflect upon NATO and its approach to maritime security in the Mediterranean. The debates on these topics shall combine the analysis of the current challenges with new ideas and suggestions to overcome regional rivalries and conflicts. Together, let us think beyond the differences in values, history, culture, and religion that exist between the different groups and players in the Mediterranean. Let us overcome them in order to increase various forms of cooperation. In conclusion, I hope you will enjoy the conference, and I wish you all fruitful and enriching exchanges during these 2 days. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Now, allow me to introduce our first special keynote speaker, Mr. Charles Fries, who will address us via a video message.
Ladies and gentlemen, High Representative Borrell asked me to represent him at the opening of this SHEDMED conference. First of all, Admiral Turquetto, let me congratulate you on your appointment as Irini's new Operation Commander. I wish you every success at the helm of this flagship operation of the EU Common Security and Defence Policy. Today, I would like to make 3 remarks about the EU's engagement in Libya, and in particular, the contribution made by Operation Irini. First, let me outline why we think that Libya is today at the crossroads. There are only a few weeks left before the elections planned for the 24th of December. Those elections have the potential to consolidate peace and stability in Libya. But there is also a risk, if elections do not take place as agreed, that vested interests will maintain the country in a situation of uncertainty with a serious danger of a return to armed violence. High Representative Borrell has reaffirmed the EU readiness to do its part to avoid such a scenario. But a lot depends on the Libyan parties themselves. They need to take the necessary steps they have jointly accepted in the roadmap. The EU is strongly committed to support the new institutions and the Libyan people. The EU is the largest provider of assistance in Libya and also the largest financial contributor to UNSMIL. To date, with a package of more than 700 million euros for the 2014-2020 financial period, EU programs in Libya have aimed at strengthening democratic and local governance, entrepreneurship, youth empowerment, rule of law, human rights, gender equality and free media, health services, COVID-19 response and migration management. In all those domains, Libya can count on EU sustained support over the next financial period. But if we want lasting results, the immediate priority is to consolidate peace and stability. Here as well, the European Union is providing an important contribution. It has been supporting the UN-brokered ceasefire talks and the definition of a political roadmap, demining and border management. In addition to IRINI, our civilian mission, UBAM, EU Border Assistance Mission, UBAM has been since 2013 a key element of our presence in Libya, and it is getting more and more traction, acting in support of the Berlin process in the areas of border management, law enforcement, and rule of law. Let me now turn to IRINI and update you on its achievements. It has been 18 months since the launch of IRINI, and the operation has brought significant results. IRINI's vessels and aircrafts have patrolled the central Mediterranean, conducting more than 4,000 hailings, close to 200 friendly approaches, and 20 inspections. IRINI seized one illegal cargo and prevented an illegal export of fuel. IRINI is making its presence felt in central Mediterranean and contributes to maritime safety off the coast of Libya. Let me recall that it is a duty for all flag states to cooperate with inspections, and the United Nations Security Council is clear about it. Beyond the sea, IRINI has also monitored violations occurring in the air and on land. It has monitored 16 Libyan ports and oil facilities, 25 airports and landing strips, and close to 200 flights, possibly carrying military-related cargoes. All these monitoring efforts, supported in large part by the EU Satellite Center and Member States intelligence, have allowed IRINI to share more than 30 classified reports with the UN panel of experts. To our disappointment, IRINI has been accused by some parties of taking side. This is not true. The operation has been monitoring vessels and planes regardless of their provenance or their flag state. The records of the inspections and the reports shared with the UN bring compelling evidence of Irene's impartiality and utmost professionalism. But Irene can only act within the boundaries of its mandate, and its mandate is geographically limited to the high seas of the coast of Libya. Irene's contribution has been recognized by the UN Secretary General, and the UN Security Council's unanimous renewal of the authorization to inspect suspect vessels at sea last June sent a strong signal of support from the international community. Throughout the past year and half, the impartiality and the legitimacy of the operation have therefore been clearly established, and Irene is able and willing to do even more. Its offer to train the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy is on the table, in cooperation with EU programs to equip our Libyan partners with patrol vessels and other law enforcement and life-saving equipment. And Irene has made considerable efforts to engage with partners and raise awareness about its mandate and its methods. Here, I would also like to express my satisfaction to see the SHADE-MED conference organized together by Irene and the NATO Maritime Command. I sincerely hope that this cooperation can also be developed operationally, as it was the case with Sofia. Information exchanged between Irene and Operation Sea Guardian would be both in the interest of the EU and NATO. And finally, I would like to conclude by looking towards the future of Libya and Irene. The High Representative, Josep Borrell, visited Libya on the 1st September 2020 and recently returned to Tripoli 1 month ago on the 8th of September. There has been considerable progress between his two visits. A ceasefire agreement has been in place for almost a year, and it still holds. This has created a historic chance for Libya to turn the page of conflicts. However, this positive momentum remains fragile and reversible. While all actors in Libya officially support the principle of elections on the 24th of December, it is of utmost importance to stick to the electoral timeline and accelerate preparations for the elections. Another issue of great concern, the withdrawal of foreign forces and mercenaries, agreed by all on paper. This withdrawal has not yet materialized on the ground. In September, during his visit to Libya, the High Representative called on all internal and external actors to do their utmost to seize this opportunity to start building a future of stability and peace for all the Libyans. He also recalled the EU's determination to do more. And in this context, Operation Irene's contribution to the implementation of the arms embargo remains as relevant as ever. We cannot let our guard down. We cannot let our guard down. We count on Irene to continue to fulfill its role as a key maritime security actor in the central Mediterranean for the months to come. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish every success to the SHADE-MED conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fries. Now we will begin with panel 1. The topic of this panel is the EU's role in building an inclusive security architecture for the basin, which will be followed by a Q&A session. It will be moderated by Professor Alessia Melkanji of La Sapienza University in Rome. Please, Alessia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of the International ShadeMed Conference 2021. My name is Alessia Melcangi, and I'm Assistant Professor at Sapienza University of Rome and Non-Resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. First of all, let me thank Admiral Stefano Turchetto, together with all the UNAFOR-Med team, for hosting this important event and inviting me to moderate this discussion. I'm really glad to join this webinar today that is dedicated to the challenges and opportunities in the Mediterranean area, as explained by the title, Pouring Oil on the Troubled Waters of the Mediterranean, the EU role in building an inclusive security architecture for the basin. This represents a very timely and important issue, as it is well known. During the last decade, the Mediterranean became one of the main geopolitical hotspots of instability due to a plurality of geopolitical, geoeconomic, and security crises currently present along the two shores of the basin. In recent years, it became evident that the Mediterranean basin had to deal both with the traditionally hard security challenges and with soft security ones, connected with political instability, economic insecurity, illicit trafficking, aggressive migration trend, religious and identity-related tensions. The result is that the region appears today to be more divided and fragmented into a series of interconnected geopolitical as well as domestic crises, which involve international, regional powers and local actors through new civil and interstate conflict and rivalries. So today we will try to understand if definitely the water of this basin are troubled water, or if it is possible to envisage some room for deepening the dialogue among the Mediterranean actors and diffusing tensions. What could be the role that you should play in order to address internal challenges within the region, boosting a more cooperative posture among the main actors? So how we can, from different perspectives, puring these extremely important waters, how we can envisage effective political, social, and economical steps to invert the current critical trends. Knowing that there is a plurality of dimensions and policies to be adopted, reactive actions to deal with specific crises, but also medium and long-term proactive policies. We have four extremely distinguished panelists, very knowledgeable about the region, that will help us to answer to these questions. We have Professor Riccardo Redelli. Professor Riccardo Redelli is director of the CRISMA, the Center of Research on the Southern System and the Wider Mediterranean of the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart of Milan. Dr. Umberto Prefazio, Associate Fellow of the International Institute for Strategic Studies and Analyst at the NATO Defense College Foundation. Ambassador Minuto Rizzo, President of the NATO Defense College Foundation, and Dr. Galia Lindestrauss, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. Thank you all for joining us. So we are going through a really interesting discussion that brings together the different perspective of our panelists. I would like to remember to our speakers that we will have 2 rounds of questions and a final question time. Due to time constraint, we need to consider 5-6 minutes for each answer. So with that, let's start. We're going to kick off actually with Professor Redelli. I would like to start with a general assessment of the geopolitical and strategical context for the Mediterranean basin, and in particular, Professor Redelli, which is the European perspective and the perception of insecurity and challenges in the area.
Thank you, Alessia, and thank you to Irini for the kind invitation. So in 5 minutes, it is a famous analyst of critical geopolitics wrote once that geography is about power. Although often assumes to be innocent, the geography of the world is not a product of nature, but a product of history of struggles. That's ending quotation. And this is extremely true. This is extremely true for the Mediterranean. The perception of this region has been influenced, deeply influenced by political transformation, and it changed accordingly. For example, if we think that during the Cold War, the Mediterranean, for us, for Europe, was essentially the south flank of NATO. This perception changed radically with the end of the Cold War. EU had to reinvent the Euro-Mediterranean space in 1990, after 1991, if we think to the attempts of the so-called Barcelona process, later on relabeled the Union for the Mediterranean. With this attempt, EU tried to give the Mediterranean basin a new internal coherence, although the results have been extremely disappointing. It is also evident that after the Cold War period, there was a divarication of interest and perception between EU and US. And the idea itself of the Mediterranean basin changed. Was not a fixed region around the sea, but we had a sort of split between the eastern part of the Mediterranean, more connected with the events in the Gulf, in the enlarged Middle East, and the West. Another element for trying to answer to your question is that all the troubles, all the tension, and also we have to admit it, a lack of European determination and weaknesses in the general foreign policy of the Union has created new geopolitical spaces for emerging or for returning powers within the region and outside the region, with a clear difference of perception between what was going on in the eastern border of the European Union and what was going on along the southern shore in the Mediterranean. At the same time, the well-known event, we don't have time here to go through all the catastrophic terroristic attack in the world, the invasion of Iraq, the attempt to restabilize Afghanistan, and the uprising. And my colleagues, I'm sure they will speak more in details. All this is given to the Mediterranean region a sort of new centrality, but it's a centrality depending from its crisis. It's a sort of giant maelstrom of instability, geopolitical rivalry, nationalistic interest, human security emergencies. In this situation of deep crisis, of profound crisis, all the political insecurity structures and mechanisms in the basin got under tension, and it seems to me, and then I'm close to close my answer, that especially in EU, one of the most negative result was a change in the perception, in the assessment of the Mediterranean basin. In EU, thanks to the European public opinion, to the press, but also to the vision of Sahel governments, European governments, the Mediterranean basin appeared almost only as a source of problems and risk, and never as an opportunity, because we know how important is from an energy, from an economic, from a commercial point of view, the Mediterranean is a sea with 1% of the water of the world, but with 15% of the commercial trade, and its role is increasing. And despite that, we focus almost obsessively on immigration, terrorism, security threat, or threats to our energy supply routes, never focusing on the positive aspect of this region. So to conclude, that's is the general assessment of the change of perception and the change of vision, especially we have in Europe, and that obviously it affected the geopolitical scenario in the region.
Thank you, Professor Redelli. This is a great kicking off with a clear picture of the state of play in the Mediterranean from the European point of view. Now, I would like to consider, I'm not sure that Ambassador Mutorizzo is here with us, because I can see him.
Yes, I am with you.
Oh, Ambassador, thank you very much. Okay. So I would like to involve you in the next question, and considering the role played by another transatlantic institution like NATO, and Ambassador Mutorizzo, after the Cold War, NATO tried to engage the Mediterranean region with programs of partnership. Can you briefly make an assessment of the results? And how do you consider NATO presence in the region today?
Well, you know, you asked me a difficult question, because in fact, NATO started in the beginning of this century, and I was the person, in fact, who was tasked by the North Atlantic Council to start and to, how can I say, to develop the Arab partnerships. So we have developed what it is known under the name of Mediterranean Dialogue, and what is called under the name of Istanbul Cooperation Initiatives. And I have to explain a little bit what it's talking about, because I think that we have so many acronyms and so many confusing messages coming from the books and from the communicators of the organizations as well. I have to say that it's better to try to explain what we're talking in private. In practice. So the Mediterranean Dialogue and the ICI were two initiatives which were meant to start a practical cooperation with the Arab countries, a practical cooperation, which means no change in the treaties, no juridical frameworks, no big political declarations, because we saw that the so-called Barcelona process, for instance, which had an enormous ambition, just didn't work because it was hostage of a crisis all the time by some of the participants on the southern side. So we preferred, and I preferred, a bottom-up approach, something based on cooperation, on simple cooperation, on simple things, which then go up and become something which links you with the other, because there is a common interest in doing that. So a completely different approach. And it has worked well. And how it worked? It worked by a program of work established every year by NATO and each of the partners, 7 partners on the Mediterranean and 6 on the Gulf, 13 in all, including Israel. And also on opening NATO activities to those countries, and having also the military establishment, if I may say so, the security establishment of the Arab countries and Israel, to share views with our authorities and to meet with the chief of staff in Brussels twice a year or so, and to establish a cooperation on the practical ground. I remember also that we had a meeting of the North Atlantic Council in Morocco in 2006, in Rabat, just to show this spirit. So, I mean, it worked. Now, what is happening, I think, is that in recent years, this spirit of having a multilateral partnership has not really kept the high ground it had up to 2010. And we went, and I'm not NATO anymore. NATO went more and more on sort of bilateral initiative towards specific countries under the name of, force support or whatever. It's full of acronyms, which are, they live for a week and then they disappear because nobody can remember what exactly they mean, rapid reaction for whatever you have, And I don't think this is an improvement because in order to have a real effort of an important organization like the Atlantic Alliance, you have to focus very specifically on what you want to do and to have a large view. Naturally, what is happening in NATO is that after, let's say, 2010, for some time, there has been a decreasing American interest in the Mediterranean. We have also to be clear on that, in the sense that the Gulf was considered to be more important, and that part of the world was considered to be something where the Europeans had to take the higher ground, with some reason, if you like. But what we see is that Europeans are not working in the way they should, because now we are speaking, and we have today the pleasure to talk, with a group of experts about a specific initiative, which is very good, this mission Irini in the Central Mediterranean. But on the other hand, if we had to look at the ambitions of the European Union at the beginning of the century, when the first groups were established in Brussels, and I had the honor to be the first ambassador of Italy to the COPS, to the political and security community, we had big ambitions and what we call the headline goal, 60,000 people available in 60 days, etc. All this is not became a substance. And I think, to be very frank, in a professional environment like the one we have today, that we have in Brussels all sorts of institutions. The European Union has everything it needs. It has a headquarters of its own, it's an awareness room, military committee, an international military staff. But if you look at the record, in fact, the operations so far have been of a very limited scope, if I may say so. Now, of course, as you say, Rome was not built in one day, so all these things can develop, and they will develop, I'm sure. But what we still lack, I think, is a full cooperation between NATO and the European Union. I don't think there is a guilty here, there is an assassin somewhere, no. It's just a problem that you have two very powerful organizations, very ambitious, with very important players, and they are not easy partners because they still don't know each other very well. And this is, I think, is another big problem. I know from the people participating also in your operation, in the present operation, that there is something missing on the other side of Brussels, and I think that we should work more on that. I would like to finish my brief intervention because we are speaking about a very large world, in fact, and a very complicated system of organizations on a period of 20 years. I remember something which has been almost forgotten, but because of bureaucratic complexities, but could be very useful. It was called Berlin Plus. It is an agreement which was made in 2002 between NATO and the European Union, where it was agreed that the European Union can decide autonomously all kinds of operations they want, and they can use automatically all NATO assets and capabilities. So this is an opportunity that, to my mind, should be used much more than has been the case. I will stop here, perhaps, unless you have a specific question to ask me.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador Minuto Rizzo, and for your really interesting answer. And we are waiting for the second round of questions. And now I think that we can jump to the other shore the southern shore and give the floor to Dr. Profazio. Dr. Profazio, I know that this could represent a difficult task, but I would like to ask you to try to underline which are the main issues of concern in the area, starting from the North African countries' perspective.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I think that from the remarks of the previous speakers, we have lighted two main points that are very interesting for our discussion. And the first is the decrease, as Ambassador Minuto said, of the US interest in the Mediterranean Sea. But I would also add on in the entire region, we have seen the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the end of the combat mission of the US in Iraq. And that means that there are new geopolitical spaces, as Professor Radelli said, which are opening in the Mediterranean. We must thus, because geopolitics doesn't like vacuums, we must now answer the questions of who is taking advantage of these new geopolitical spaces, or according to the title of this session, who is pouring oil on the troubled waters of the Mediterranean. I think that we have two different lines of answers to that. The first is the external powers, and I refer here especially to the global actors, meaning Russia, for example, with the use of hybrid warfare, especially in Libya, but also in the Sahel through the use of private military contractors, such as the Wagner Group, which is creating more instability, and it also has a humanitarian aspect, given the fact that most of these groups doesn't take into account humanitarian law and international human rights. But also China, which is more relying on a soft power strategy, for example, using vaccine diplomacy to increase its outreach to many of these countries in North Africa and especially in the Maghreb. Then there is the second line of answers to these questions, which is the regional confrontation. Regional powers are becoming more aggressive, more assertive, because they perceive this US retrenchment from the area. And here I would like to refer to these new trends which are taking root in the region, taking advantage of structural challenges, such as, for example, frozen conflicts, the Western Sahara, Cyprus, but also Libya, which without an inclusive agreement or a constitutional framework for the elections could also see an increase in instability in the next few weeks or months. And the new paradigms also that are stemming out from the latest Abraham Accords, and the fact that right now in the region, it seems that there is an increasing rift between countries that are part of the what I call the normalization front, the group of Arab countries which are normalized ties with Israel. And this is increasingly visible in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially around Cyprus and the question of the island. And on the other side, I think that we are seeing a revisionist front, a group of countries that are trying to challenging the status quo and to revise the geography of the region. And here I refer especially to Turkey, because it's an important actor in the Mediterranean, and its actions have created some of these rifts. Yeah, I think that concluding, considering this panel and also the reference to the inclusive security architecture, I think that it's really important to highlight that right now, with this emerging two regional fronts, instead of having an inclusive architecture, we are going towards a divisive architecture that could create troubles, especially in the frozen conflict scenario of Libya, Western Sahara, and Cyprus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Profazio. Now your answer helped me to move to another part of this sea, the Mediterranean. Now I would like to move to the Eastern Mediterranean, which in many ways represent a microcosm of the international community. It has served as a stage for maritime security issues, competition among regional powers, energy and economic issues, migration crisis, and overarching great power competition. In particular, the Eastern Mediterranean is currently dealing with a plurality of challenges. Dr. Linda Strauss, can you help us to paint a quick picture of some of the most recent flare-ups and tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean to try to set the scene and summarize the existing state of play of regional and international actors in the region?
So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk in this distinguished forum today. In the Eastern Mediterranean, as mentioned, we have long-standing disputes, frozen conflicts such as the Cyprus issue. But in the past decade, we saw new flare-ups. They manifest themselves with regards to dispute over the delimitation of the economic exclusive zones, the EEZ, because the Mediterranean is small. It's too small to give all these states their full EEZ rights. But these flare-ups also represents bigger issues that are in stake. For example, while Turkey disputes both Greece's EEZ claims and those of the Republic of Cyprus, some of its search and drilling activities, beyond being disputable in themselves, are in areas where it is unlikely that there will be any major gas discoveries. Meaning that it's not just the gas that is pushing Ankara to act. Similarly, the EEZ dispute between Israel and Lebanon, which in a pure technical sense is much easier than the dispute between Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus, has yet to be worked out. The previous round of negotiations between Israel and Lebanon actually only widened the dispute between Israel and Lebanon, mainly because there are other issues at play. And specifically, the major role Hezbollah plays in Lebanon's decision-making process. This makes it very hard to reach a positive outcome between Israel and Lebanon, although in light of the state of the Lebanese economy in its dire state, gas discoveries would be very beneficial for Lebanon. So it's not just gas and economic dispute. Many of the regional actors see growing strategic importance in their presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'll give an example from Israel. Israel now has major energy infrastructure off its shores, so it needs to secure it. We see also a naval arms race in the Eastern Mediterranean, including substantial purchase by the regional actors of submarines. And we see numerous joint military drills in the area. Now, while Ankara may claim that the way it operates in the Eastern Mediterranean is to defend its rights, and that it had to act this way because the Republic of Cyprus began signing all sorts of EEZ agreements with Egypt, with Lebanon, with Israel, many of the other actors, as already mentioned, see Turkey as a revisionist state with maximalistic aims, and thus they cooperate among themselves in order to contain and hopefully even reverse what they see as Turkish revisionism. Now, while being very simplistic, it is not completely wrong to claim that we see an unofficial axis from Greece in the west through Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, the UAE in the middle, and India in the east, which is colliding, or there's potential collision with the Turkey, Qatar, Hamas, Pakistan axis. Now, France supports this axis that is basically led by Greece, while other countries like Germany and Italy are more careful with taking sides. With regard to the US, we know that there's a deep crisis in Turkish-US relations, and that Greek-US relations have never been better. But I think Washington still tries to balance these two relationships. Russia has naval presence in the Eastern Mediterranean through its naval base. Major gas exports from the East Mediterranean because they will be in competition with Russian gas exports. China's Belt and Road initiatives also has components in the Eastern Mediterranean. So it's not a major political actor in the area, but it has significant economic investments, especially in ports, that do make an influence on actors' considerations in the region. And I'll stop here, and I'm looking forward for the rest of this discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Strauss. This question, let me go with your answer. We can conclude our first round of questions, which try to underline the main reasons of concern in the Mediterranean, using different points of view, of course, and focusing especially on the role played by you and NATO. Now I would like to start the second round and trying to understand if there are some positive perspective regarding this area, if there are some positive possibility to diffuse tensions and support or boost a more collaboration among actors in this context. So I would like to start with Professor Redaelli. Professor Redaelli, in your opinion, which might be some possible practical effective steps to be taken in order to reduce the gap between the two shores or increase the level of cooperation, triggering a positive trend? In particular, moving from your perspective, what the European Union can do in order to act in a more positive way, and how important are neighborhood policy and partnership agreement in combating tensions surrounding the Mediterranean?
Thanks for your question, Professor Mkanji. You know, an extremely complex and difficult one, as I meant to say. And you know that we analysts, it's easier to underline the problems and the mistake rather than to offer practical steps and solutions. But let's try in a few minutes to say something on that. Dr. Profazio told that, and also the other colleagues, the effect of US, I don't want to use the withdrawal from the seas of the Mediterranean, but a certain lack of interest and reluctance to practice. And this is true for the US, but it is very true also for EU. My first suggestion for Europe is come back to the Mediterranean with a new comprehensive vision. And if you read, as you have done, the galaxy of publication on the EU policy towards the Mediterranean, the Barcelona process, the Union for the Mediterranean, you see, I mean, dozens of thousands of pages of critics, how ineffective, how they fail, whatever. But we can be very, very tough in judging those programs and projects of engagement of EU. But at least there was an attempt. In particular, during the last decades, EU has been too hesitant, extremely hesitant in dealing with the Mediterranean. And this reluctance, together with the American ones, has paved the ways, opened the door for actions by other powers, which might be more effective than us, but they lack the capacity to offer a vision which is inclusive of all the actors. So I really believe that EU, with all its limits and mistakes, has the capacity to propose a new path, a vision, not to impose a vision, but to offer a path for creating a new security architecture in the basin. This is extremely necessary to escape from the zero-sum game trap, where any actor is just looking for the selfish short-term interest in competition with others. Competition is natural among states and among organizations, but we try to offer a better vision, a more holistic, a more inclusive vision. And I think that Europe should do. So the first step is for Europe to refocus less, to be less obsessed about our internal problems, but to look to this region trying to govern and to adapt to the changes. It is also evident that at global level, there is a huge power transformation with a reshaping of power relation. So it is a childish illusion that if we are not looking to these changes, they will disappear. They will not. So we have to go back and try to govern with the lesson learned of the past European programs. So I would like to suggest to have a more active role, even in the specific crisis. For example, in Libya, I think that is self-evident how intra-EU rivalries has hampered the EU role in Libya. But still, Libya need a EU better presence. We have to think to the our energy security policy, not in terms of a securitization of the energy security, but in terms of a more active presence, a more coordinated presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Dr. Linda Strauss was speaking just minutes ago on how interest and the potentiality of this area, but also the challenges they might provide. So I don't have a lot of practical steps, but I would really like Europe to be present again, to refocus on this basing, trying to come up with some coordinate projects and to reduce the intra-EU rivalry, which has been really has poisoned our policy especially during the last decades, after in particular the so-called Arab Spring, the Arab insurgencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Redelli. Your answer on the role you should have regarding the main conflict and tension in the area able me to consider also the role of NATO and give the floor to Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo. Ambassador Minuto-Rizzo, with the new century, NATO has completely revised its strategic doctrine. The result was the adoption of a new strategic concept in 2010. Can you briefly outline it in relation with the Mediterranean and if it might play a positive role in diffusing tension in this specific area?
Well, I hope that you hear me.
Yes.
Good. What can I say? The intervention which I preceded by, of the professor, is very clear. He put out all the main issues on the table, in fact, and you can perhaps reduce them to a few minimal ideas and concepts. The fact that both NATO and European Union, frankly speaking, are not up to the challenges that are present today. Again, we don't live in a perfect world, so it is clear that, for instance, in European Union, you don't build a security culture in 20 years, To give you a very small practical example to tell you how, we come really from far away. I remember that when the institutions started to work in Brussels, the military committee, COPS, etc., the European Parliament pretended that Xavier Solana, who was the high representative at the time, gave a copy of all his letters to the Parliament, which was a very bizarre request in name of transparency. Okay, if you speak about practical things like, agricultural policy or other things, it's normal to be transparent. But it is clear that, when you're talking about such sensitive things about like military operations or political agreements or whatever you like in the area, it is clear that a certain degree of confidentiality is part of the affair since the beginning of the world. I mean, we are not discovering anything. And the poor Solana had to discuss for a couple of years this issue with the European Parliament. We didn't want to be convinced of his view. Just to say, that we are starting from scratches, And also, the other thing, again, is that European public opinion doesn't like to see people in uniform in TV. We see even in our country, in Italy, the general Figliolo, people started asking, why a man in uniform? Why do we need that? And also, violence is not something that we like. All this is understood is a matter also of civilization in a way, but of course, it doesn't help us in this respect. NATO has a culture of security. It has a culture of security. This is completely different from the European Union. I'm not saying that one organization is better than another. This is not the point. They are completely different, and we can discuss that if you are interested. Completely different things. One is an alliance, the other is an international organization. Europe has 1% of the PNB devoted to the budget. On the contrary, NATO, you pay your own expenses, except the headquarters and the salary of the Secretary General. So it's a totally different culture and philosophy. But, NATO has been, how can I say, obsessed by the East for a long time, and is still a little bit obsessed by the East, for historical reasons that you can understand, of course, because the Cold War has its origin there. Looking at Moscow has been always natural, and the new members of NATO, like the Baltic countries and Poland, are of course especially sensitive to that area. And the countries of the South have never been able to really put up a strategy, which is to be accepted in parallel with the other. Now this thing should be changing because, as the professor said before, if you forget about the challenges, you can forget, but the challenges remain there. They don't go away, unfortunately. As in our private life, this is exactly the same. We have to face reality. So now, but there are some reasons. Let's not be too negative. There are some reasons for optimism because in NATO, since a couple of years, there is a process of reform going on. In the way, a big international organization does, which is a complicated bureaucratic way with committees, group of wise men and whatever you have, But in the end, the process is there. The process is there, it's going on. We are lucky because we have a new administration in Washington, which may be a little bit naive, as we have seen with the submarines, but certainly much more favorable to this process than the previous one, which was attacking the Allied all the time, insulting them. It was really an impossible situation. So now we have a Secretary General who has to start working on let's say, renewing the strategic concept. As far as I know, the idea about the strategic concept is not to write a completely new book, because that it will take years and it will be possible to have an agreement of 30 countries on that. I think that the basic idea is to have the text of 2010, which was led, I remember, perhaps you remember as well, Madeleine Albright was the one who was taking care of the entire work, but to adapt certain parts of it where we think that the time, has a process called by the Secretary General of NATO. Nobody exactly understand what it means, but it looks like again, trying to interpret bureaucratic words and power struggles as well. In terms of having NATO a little bit more political, which is really very essential, because we had a very important military base in NATO, but a small political head. And I hear about, having an European, let's say, part of NATO dealing with the Americans and the Canadians. I don't think it will go far. This is not the way you have an international organization. But certainly the Europeans should be in NATO with a more active voice. Because today, let's be frank among us, most people in Europe think that NATO is a sort of American thing in a way or in another. And we have to correct that, because, it works by consensus and the large majority is European. So this 2030 process should be a process where you identify a few areas like high technology, like information, like political consultation, and you try to enhance them and to make them a little bit more visible in order to, how can I say, to compensate this very good military organization. But again, a military organization without a political head will not go too far. So there are reasons of optimism. Another reason of optimism is that we have a summit in Spain next July, and in September we have a new Secretary General. And so my opinion, which is very honest, I think, from an intellectual point of view, is that we should have a big country having the Secretary General, and not only small countries, like, with due respect, of course, to the country Norway or Denmark, because if you have countries with a culture of stability contributing all the time to the NATO operations along 70 years, you can count on somebody having perhaps a larger view of the world, where you take care of, of the main issues existing in the world, and not only your neighbor who's nasty or has a dictator or whatever, which is understandable again, but is not the way it should work. So this is what I hope that it will happen, that NATO can regain its high ground from a political point of view. And I think also that the Americans should, it is something that is an inside story, if you like, but the Americans should also invest more on the old allies they had in Europe, who have been loyal all the time and sometimes had the impression to be, I want to say, overlooked. And I speak about Italy as well, frankly speaking. And I would be very happy to have a new Italian Secretary General of NATO, but of course this is a process which has to come, and it will start only in 1 year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Minutorizzo. Thank you for your insight, very precious insight. Unfortunately, I'm not really sure that there are so many reasons of optimism in a particular country of the North African shore. In this regard, Dr. Profazio, in your previous answer, you underlined the main concern from the Southern Shore perspective, of course, putting the light on the Libyan crisis. Libya represents main focus on instability in the Mediterranean. So focusing on this crisis, I would like to ask you, which might be some possible step to support the fundamental national political process and achieve a possible pacification or the diffusing of tension in the country?
Yes, I think that NATO should play a role in here, mainly because it's the best organization, the most equipped organization to deal with a problem which has afflicted Libya in the past decade, which is the proliferation of militias and armed groups. There is a concrete lack of unified military structure in Libya. Despite all the different names, we still lack a legitimate army, and this has increased the divide between the East and the West. which is also reflected on the political level. I think we are now approaching a moment in which what has been successfully called as a strategic pause is coming to a close, is coming to an end. And the fact that the parliament in Tobruk has withdrawn the trust in the government of national unity also highlight the fact that it's just a change in acronyms. We just changed the letter U to the letter A, and instead of having the GNA, the previously established government in Tripoli, we have the GNU. But still, the political polarization in the country is still high, and approaching the elections, it is likely to increase. And that is why I think that the recent events, including the approval of the elections law by the IHR, is really controversial. Previously, there was a US proposal to have general elections before the presidential elections, because we know that presidential elections are much more divisive for the country. We understand the need that there is, Libya needs a political turnover, but given the fact that most of the former UN Special Envoy Stephanie Williams called the political dinosaurs, they are coming back. They are ready to present their candidature for the presidential elections. And given their experience, the previous experience in Libya, this can only increase divisiveness and create the premises for a partition in the country between the East and the West. This could create a frozen conflict scenario in Libya, and we know that especially external actors, including Russia, are very well versed in navigating these challenging environments. And that is why I think that NATO could be an important actor, also because it could have a more inclusive approach towards Turkey, which is an important member of NATO, and which is in Libya fighting mainly the Russians. And this could create the premises for the establishment of a security sector reform and the disarmament and the demobilization of militias. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Profazio. Very complex is the situation in Libya and in the Mediterranean, but I think also in the Eastern Mediterranean, as Dr. Linda Strauss helped us to understand in the previous question. Now, at the same time, I would like to understand and yes, try to understand if there are some also in this area, in this Mediterranean, possible to find a positive solution or a positive approach. So, Dr. Linda Strauss, I would like to ask you, do you think that the creation of energy alliance and economic deals, so starting from the importance of the new gas discoveries and the role played by these sectors, do you think that the creation of energy alliance and economic deals could represent a positive trigger for creating a more cooperative approach among the principal actors of the area and trying to diffuse tension in the Eastern Mediterranean?
So we definitely need regional forums to discuss burning issues in the Eastern Mediterranean, from energy to environment. The East Med Gas Forum that was established in 2019 is a good start. And indeed, it was a very notable development because it was created by the states in the region and was not imposed from the outside. The problem with the EMGF is the fact that Turkey and Lebanon are not part of it, nor is, of course, Syria. It's debatable whether the EMGF could one day expand to include these states. And if not, we need to think about alternatives. Probably the issue of emergency preparedness would be the less thorny issue to start with, and with climate change, we will have more emergencies that we need to prepare for. Also, we know that the Eastern Mediterranean is a climate change hotspot. The changes will be worse in our region, but there is also great potential for renewable energy, of solar and wind power. So this is another area where we could maybe advance in. Connectivity of both undersea internet cables and electricity grid is another area of interest. And with regard to electricity interconnectors, clearly the EU has done very critical work. Last remark very shortly, NATO has been obviously very instrumental in the past, but also in the present in diffusing some of the tensions between Greece and Turkey. Both Athens and Ankara see their membership in NATO as very important, and hence they will show some flexibility when they are presented with the consequences of their actions with regard to the cohesion of NATO. And I'll add to this that in light of the tensions surrounding all the S-400 acquisition by Ankara from Russia, Turkey is looking for ways to present its critical importance to NATO. And we saw this in Ankara's willingness to maintain a role in Afghanistan. Didn't materialize, but Ankara said it was willing to maintain a role in Afghanistan after the NATO and US withdrawal. And I think also in the Eastern Mediterranean, the fact that 2021, there was an attempt to relaxation of tensions in compared to 2020, this also relates to Turkey's relations with some of its NATO allies. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Linda Strauss. Thank you very much. Now we have a few minutes for some question, so we can open the question time. I received two questions. The first is for Professor Edelli. Professor Edelli, after the NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan, which are the lessons learned regarding the stabilization process? Professor Edelli?
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, there was a delay with the microphone. So thank you. Thank you for the question. Another difficult question, indeed. I think that obviously Afghanistan has been a harsh lesson for us and for the whole international community. If we look to the disastrous result of 20 years of engagement by more than 50 countries with the support of UN, I think that underlies all the military, political, economic, social, and cultural mistake we have done. It is also true that Afghanistan is probably one of the most difficult area where to operate in. I personally carried out researches along its border with Iran and Pakistan for many years during the 90s, and I have been invited several times by ISAF, by the NATO mission in Afghanistan. Indeed, Afghanistan is difficult. It's difficult historically. It's a country very difficult to control. Has a complex, divided society with shutter belts, with ethnic, cultural, tribal identity shutter belts, and then we enter in a society who had been violated, if I may say, by decades of civil war and invasion wars, like the Soviet entering, when Soviet Union entered in '79. That was the opening of the Pandora box for that country. So we had generations of Afghans living only during wartime, but more in general. So the difficulties were well evident. I think that the first lesson is it emphasizes once more how difficult it's possible to conclude integrated, complex, post-conflict mission of institution building and stabilization. This is a lesson we had from the other missions of institution building, of stabilization from Kosovo we are entered in Kosovo in 98. We are there in Bosnia. The mission, the post-conflict mission in Africa, from Congo, the problem in Darfur. So when you start a peace-building mission, you know that you have to remain in a country for many years. And the second lesson, the second harsh lesson, I think, is that in a way, as many times has been said, time was on Taliban side, in the sense that Taliban is often in the insurgent time, insurgent side, in the sense that very often the international community and the states join those hybrid missions, but then the lack the capacity, the political capacity to support for many years, to accept human losses, to pay the prices, and that was a lesson, thanks to the difficulty NATO had to reduce the caveat of the states, with states participating in ISAF, but with a lot of caveat and reducing our military capacity. And a third important lessons, I think, is derived from the failure in Afghanistan, is that those complex missions are a hybrid mission, in the sense that you have to deal and to address problems and try to solve, to deal with challenges at military level, at political level, economic, social level, at educational, rebuilding a new culture of living together. So you have top leadership, medium, grassroots, peace-building approaches. We probably focus too much on the security aspect and on the formal aspect of the political ones, focusing to have elections, despite the fact that the elections, process were highly contested, and we do not focus enough on addressing the real necessity of the population. And when you focus on the formality of the democratization process, you sometimes lose the perspective of the daily life. That's what the Afghan will often say. We did not address the huge corruption of the new Afghan authorities, and we knew, we were looking at the huge level of corruption. We have been unable to deal with the regional countries. Just to let me mention Pakistan. Pakistan was an ally of US, an ally of NATO, but at the same time, the best allies of our worst enemy. So that was a contradiction we were unable to solve. And so the last things that I want to abuse of our time is that when we work on international cooperation, when we work on peace building, we know we are working on marginality. The best result you can get is a marginal positive result. You cannot get 100%, never. That's a clear lesson. But in Afghanistan, we failed because we missed to understand the real trigger of insurgencies, and we focus too much on the formal aspect, and the formal aspect you cannot build the real pillar for a positive peace, not only the end of conflict. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Redelli. Thank you because you help us to depict the main element of this really problematic situation. Maybe also for this reason, there is the necessity to reinforce cooperation between and among international organizations. And here I have another question for Ambassador Minuto Rizzo. Ambassador, how, in your opinion, how you and NATO could strengthen their cooperation to face the challenges on the southern flank?
Well, you know, do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's only a problem of political will. You know, of priorities that you want to establish. It's very easy and very difficult at the same time. So when I spoke in my first intervention about the NATO partnership in the South, why it happened, I didn't say why, but I will say now. It was because the Americans, after the failure in Iraq, understood and thought that it was necessary to produce something positive toward the Arab world, which was not the same thing as the bad things happening in Iraq. And so, in fact, inside NATO, they say, you know, we should pay more attention to the Arab world and to Israel, because future threats, not only international terrorism, but also instability, will come from that part of the world. And so they say, let's do it, you know, let's, and we had months of negotiations. And then in the end, it was decided to go for those partnerships in practical terms, as I tried to explain before. So in order to make things simple and not complicated, because if you start asking for a treaty, if you want a new Barcelona declaration, you will never end. No, you have to go for practical things which are of common interest, and they exist, there are. I have been doing that for 5 years myself, personally, in the name of NATO. It works, because people are not stupid and they understand when there is something useful, they will do it. Perhaps they don't want to be too, how can I say, too outspoken or too formal or official on that, but they understand. And it is only a problem of political will. Inside NATO, this, as I said before in a diplomatic way, it has not existed very much in the past few years, because we became, after 2013, victims again of this Eastern syndrome, you know, Donbass and Ukraine and all that, forgetting a little bit the rest of the world. And we should, that's why I say we should really rebuild things. We should have a new Secretary General, a new strategic concept, a more political NATO, something new up to the times. And of course, we have not spoken about the Indo-Pacific area, which is a delicate thing, which I think we have to touch in a light way, because it's not something, you know, to be how can I say, driven by strong emotions. And it is possible to do it. And if I may add a word, with your permission, to what the professor said before, I've been involved myself very much in Afghanistan. And by the way, I was the person who myself started officially the NATO operation in Kabul on August 11, 2003. So I have also strong emotions about that, because at that time it seemed to be impossible that we would lose Afghanistan. It looked absolutely impossible, because let's be frank, you know, everybody speaks about NATO, but this is a mistake. In fact, we have the entire international community, from the World Bank to whatever, ONGs of all nationalities, of all kinds, United Nations, the Security Council, the International Monetary Fund, whatever. It shows what, to me, I don't want to speak as much, the professor spoke very well, by the way, before. I think, you know, the international community is not prepared for this kind of things. It's not prepared. I remember the late Donald Rumsfeld, who was perhaps a little bit a tough person, but also an intelligent person. I remember him in a closed-door meeting of NATO saying, well, you know, we, governments of democratic societies, we are accustomed to send a regiment abroad, because we do that. It is countries, the government has always done that. You can have troops, you know, doing things because they will obey the government. But you cannot have a judge, or you cannot have an economist, big obliged to go to Afghanistan or to Central Africa, etc. The international community is not equipped yet for that. And I remember my friend at the time, Kai Eide, who was the Norwegian representative of the Secretary General in Kabul. He told me that there were about 45 countries helping with development projects. I'm not speaking about security of military, I'm speaking about development. And he said, you know, that all those 45 countries, they were all acting there without coordination, each one with their own rules, national rules, you know, how you have a contract, how you develop a thing, how your parliament has to approve, and only a part of them even advising him and telling him by letter what they were going to do. So you have enormous amount of money which is spent, which, you know, and everybody is scandalized about that, right? And so, but in the end, the effect of this amount of money has been reduced by the fact that it was not coordinated in a centralized way or semi-centralized way. This is very important, and it goes far beyond NATO and security, you know, and military and all that. So this is, I think, is another lesson of Afghanistan. And then, of course, we don't have the patience to do things for a long time. We can, I think. I think that the international community, what we call, excuse me, for the civilized world, could spend more time in Afghanistan with less money. It will not be so terrible. We spend a lot of money on all other things. And then last thing was the bad, very bad behavior of the American administration, because when Donald Trump has signed practically these Doha agreements in February 2020, he signed the death sentence for the Afghan government, because you cannot have a negotiation with the worst enemy of your ally, you know. And if you read, you know, it's a very short text, by the way, interesting to read. I suggested you do that, because you have all the time the Afghanistan, the Islamic Emirate in the text of the agreement. So, you know, if you are sitting in Kabul, you know, and you have your protector signing with the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan a treaty where they decide that they leave you alone. Of course, this is a death sentence, you know. When you speak about Afghanistan, you have also to take this part, this chapter, into consideration.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Maurizio. We received different questions, a lot of questions, but we need to respect timing in order to give the floor to the next panel. We are the end of the first panel of the ShadeMed Conference 2021. I would like to thank all our remarkable speakers. Thank you very much for your precious insight, and all of you who decided to spend this hour joining us. Thank you for your participation. Finally, let me thank Admiral Fabio Agostini, a dear friend, for his fundamental and invaluable support during this month and the organization, not always easy, of this event. Thank you very much. Please remain connected with us for the next panel, titled Freedom from Need, Freedom from Fear, Jointly Building a Better People-Centered Policy in the Mediterranean Basin. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of the speakers of panel one, as well as to you, Professor Alessia Malcangi, for moderating. You really did an excellent job of managing the panel, and the contributions were very valuable. We will now take a short 2-minute break and will return at 1100 hours for the next panel. Thank you.
means that all stabilizing efforts should go beyond the idea of simply avoiding or ending a conflict and look at the principles stated in the first article of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. The EU has always promoted visions and policies to deal with underdevelopment, inequality, and violation of the basic human rights, such as the right to education, health, freedom from need, and freedom of expression and beliefs, gender equality, respect for minorities, child protection. It is essential that the promotion and the preservation of these pillars involve all shores of the wider Mediterranean, as well as all the neighbouring countries. So I'll just check that all the panel members are connected, and then we can reflect on this. Do we have Vincent Koschel?
Yes, standing by.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
For being with us. Can you tell us what is the current situation with migrant sea departures from Tunisia and Libya?
Thank you very much. Well, what we've seen over the last couple of months is that with the more stable security situation and renewed political dialogue, we have seen an improvement of the economic situation in Libya in spite of the pandemic. This meant more opportunities for Libyans and the sizable migrant and refugee population in its territory, approximately 600,000 people. When you look at the employment rate in the migrant population in Libya, we have an unemployment rate of 22%, which is only 5% above what it was before the pandemic. So more work opportunity means in principle more stabilization and less irregular sea departure from Libya. However, everything remains precarious because this work is not regularized. People are still living outside the scope of the law in Libya. They have no possibility to regularize their stay or their work. And last Friday, we have witnessed a massive arrest of about 5,000 foreigners in Tripoli, which has been justified by the Libyan authorities as a law enforcement operation to address drug and criminal groups. Of course, no one is above the law, but this is not the way we're going to manage migration in Libya. This massive arrest has led to detention and unfortunately a cycle of abuse that we have seen in detention center that continue. In addition, this mass arrest is creating tension with neighboring countries and will create a state of panic which may lead to more sea departure depending on the weather and sea condition. Of course, in Tunisia, situation is different. Political situation is also quite uncertain at this stage. The impact of the COVID on the livelihood of the people in the southern governorates has led to the temporary closure of the border between Libya and Tunisia has led more Tunisians to take to the sea and try to reach Italy. They are joined by foreigners, migrants and refugees living on the Tunisian territory, who are people who have normally arrived legally in Tunisia by air. We have to see also this year that Tunisia has become the second country of disembarkation for people living by sea Libya. You know, we believe everybody goes to Italy. Yes, the majority of the people go to Italy, but actually some of the boats are drifting from the Libyan waters into Tunisia. So in terms of departure, the figure, so we've seen 145% increase in sea departure from Libya, increase also from Tunisia by 95%, and decrease in terms of sea departure from Algeria. But those figures should also be taken with a pinch of salt, in the sense that we see the capacity of the Tunisian authorities to intervene in terms of interception and rescue at sea has increased by 9%. So in 44% of the case, people are rescued directly by the Tunisian authorities, 53% by the Libyan authorities, which is a 9% plus, and 33% of the people are rescued or intercepted by the Algerian authorities, which is a decrease compared to last year. So mixed trends, but unfortunately we have a deteriorating situation in Libya, which is going to affect all the neighboring countries. Thank you.
So very different situations in between Tunisia and Libya, but still increased departures. What sort of regional cooperation do you feel could improve the situation from UNHCR's point of view?
Well, I think the first thing was we needed an acknowledgement from North African countries that they are not just countries of origin on departure for their national. They're not just country of transit for some third country national who are living irregularly by sea, but they are also countries of destination. During the COVID, we've seen lots of invisible population who are employed in key sectors of the economy and in the informal sector of the economy coming out because they wanted to be included in the national health response. So there is, I think, a better recognition by North African countries that they need to better manage migration on the status of refugee on their territory. We had a good meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh beginning of June, organized under the auspices of the League of Arab States, to start a dialogue with all the North African countries on that issue. Unfortunately, this comes also with some rejection sometimes by host communities because the problem is not well managed. So it leads to expulsion, it leads to a rise in xenophobia. So, you know, governments need to be assisted in better managing migration in the broad sense. Another aspect is the effort of fighting trafficking. We've seen more efforts by the Tunisian authorities and by Libya to arrest traffickers. But unfortunately, in the case of Libya, those traffickers are not tried. They are released quickly after, and some of the traffickers are clearly authorized or protected to continue their business. So I think the cooperation needs to be deepened, needs to go into the area of law enforcement, and it requires the collaboration of neighboring countries because, of course, Libya's problems are related to the situation in neighboring countries, which has deteriorated in Chad, in Niger, in Darfur, in Sudan, as well as in many of the Sahel countries. So we should not be surprised if the push factors are still there and people will continue to try to go to Morocco, to Algeria, to Tunisia, and to Libya, and to Egypt. But we need to manage that better, and we need to support the capacity of the regional operational center to combat trafficking in Khartoum. That's for us a crucial place and entity to coordinate those anti-trafficking efforts. As to arrival in Europe, they are manageable in terms of numbers, but numbers are only manageable if we get better screening, systematic fingerprinting, which we have not seen in some instances, quick returns for people not in need of international protection, and of course more solidarity with Italy and Malta, which is still lacking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll certainly circle back to some of those issues, especially the management of migration and migrant processing centres. I'd like to pull in now our Madame Belhaj Mida Botra in Tunisia of the Commission of Individual Freedoms and Equality. Bonjour, Madame. Are you there?
Ça va, je vous entends.
Bonjour.
Bonjour tout le monde.
My first question for you is, and then our colleague will translate it. What is the state of human rights in the southern Mediterranean since the Arab revolutions of 2011? How concerned should we be about the human rights abuses in the so-called migrant processing centres in Libya and Niger, facilitated by EU money?
Il faut d'abord constater que la plupart des révolutions arabes ont échoué. Les unes comme la Libye, comme la Syrie, comme le Yémen, ont carrément viré en une guerre civile. Donc, parler aujourd'hui de révolution, c'est très difficile. D'abord, l'échec, en plus des guerres civiles, et en plus, ceux qui n'ont pas subi des guerres civiles, je parle notamment de l'Égypte, c'est un retour à la dictature militaire. Et pour la Tunisie, comme vous le savez, nous sommes malheureusement l'exception, parce que, je dis malheureusement, parce que tant qu'on demeure une exception, c'est difficile d'être sûr que ça va évoluer dans le bon sens. Aujourd'hui même en Tunisie, comme vous le savez, nous avons des difficultés à assurer la démocratie, mais aussi les droits humains. C'est vrai que la situation des droits humains dans tout le monde arabe est catastrophique. Mais encore, dans les pays où il y a la révolution, il y a eu la révolution, la peur est revenue dans le camp des populations, la peur de l'autoritarisme, de l'État fort, de l'État despotique, mais aussi s'est ajoutée une nouvelle peur, la peur de la guerre. Donc, c'est une double peur. La première qui a toujours existé et qu'on croyait que la révolution a mis fin à cette guerre, à cette peur, mais malheureusement, elle est revenue avec une nouvelle peur. De l'autre côté, l'Égypte, comme vous le savez, les exactions sont quotidiennes. Toute voix dissidente, toute voix qui ne soit pas dans le soutien de l'État est réprimée. Malheureusement, il faut le dire, que l'Europe et l'Occident, d'une manière générale, soutiennent encore une fois la dictature. Pour la Tunisie, c'est un peu différent. J'ai essayé de comprendre ce qu'a dit monsieur avant. Désolé, la traduction, pour la traduction, parce que je ne peux pas reprendre mot à mot. Je dis la même idée, mais peut-être autrement exprimée. Donc, pour moi, la Tunisie reste une exception. Je dis toujours malheureusement, parce que quand on est entouré par des pays non démocratiques, notre propre démocratie est fragile. Et la preuve aujourd'hui que nous sommes dans une situation politique assez difficile, parce qu'aujourd'hui, quand le président de la République monopolise tous les pouvoirs, qu'il gèle une institution telle que le Parlement, qui a été élu démocratiquement, même s'il n'a pas été à la hauteur, mais c'est un Parlement qui est aujourd'hui, qui a été élu par la population tunisienne dans la transparence et dans la démocratie. Quand on sait que le président de la République n'accepte aucune opposition, malheureusement, chaque fois qu'il prend la parole, c'est pour diaboliser, diffamer, insulter et menacer l'opposition. Donc, déjà que depuis la Révolution, on n'a pas pu mettre fin aux exactions des droits de l'homme, c'est la vérité. Depuis la Révolution, c'est vrai qu'en Tunisie, on n'est pas au même niveau de la répression, mais quand même, la torture est là. Il y a le rapport des instances et des associations, la poursuite des homosexuels en Tunisie depuis la Révolution est continue. Les atteintes aux libertés, notamment individuelles, continuent. Les lois n'ont pas changé. On n'a même pas réussi à changer les lois pour les adopter et les harmoniser avec la Constitution. Donc, je trouve que la situation dans le monde arabe, d'une manière générale, bien sûr, de façon inégale, elle est loin de garantir les droits humains. Et ce qui est perçu dans le monde, dans nos pays, c'est que ces pouvoirs continuent leur exaction. C'est grâce aussi à la complicité de l'Occident et notamment de l'Europe. On va revenir peut-être après, mais je ne sais pas maintenant, je dois passer à la question des camps. Je n'ai pas compris parce que
No, I think the colleague will translate it now, but as you say, very many areas of concern. Yeah, if I can ask our colleague to translate into English.
Yeah, so I'll now provide a translation. I will say that I'm not a native French speaker, so I do have a pre-prepared response, which is a more concise version and doesn't elaborate quite as much, but I'll read through that now. So it is sad to note after 10 years that most of the Arab revolutions have not only failed to meet the aspirations of the people to freedom, dignity, and good governance, but also in Libya, Yemen, and Syria, these revolutions have turned into civil war that the committed and enthusiastic youth is and will continue to suffer the effects for years, especially since finally, after the wars ended, we see the restoration of totalitarian regimes. Egypt did not go through a civil war, but the restoration is quickly done with a more aggressive regime than before 2011. So the state of human rights is worse than before the revolutions. And to the fear that reigns again in front of the totalitarian regimes is added the trauma suffered by the populations because of these wars. Tunisia has escaped civil war until today. Even if it is true that the situation of human rights is not comparable to what it was before the revolution, the infringements of human rights and the violations of the liberties, especially on individuals, did not cease definitively. For example, torture, judgment of the civilians in front of the military courts, and pursuits for homosexuality, etc. The situation is more worrying since July 25th, because the President of the Republic has frozen the work of the Assembly of the People's Representative. He has monopolized all the powers and threatens, insults, and discredits his opponents.
Yeah, as you've highlighted, very many areas of concern. And what is your view on how far the international community is prioritizing managing migration, or rather stopping migration, over human rights? And is it possible to achieve a balance? Madame Boucher?
J'ai pas compris la question. C'est la situation, parce que moi, dans quelle mesure devons-nous nous inquiéter? C'est ça que j'ai comme question. Je ne sais pas la question que vous avez posée. Je n'ai pas compris la question. Désolé. I don't understand the question, because in my paper, I have another question.
Ah.
What question, please?
I see. Hold on 1 second. We have a little translation issue. We'll resolve this in just a moment.
Excuse me, because
the question is, how far is the international community prioritizing managing migration, or rather stopping migration, over human rights? And is it possible to achieve a balance?
Je pense qu'il vaut mieux que vous ayez directement la réponse traduite. Je pense, hein, parce que ça ne sert à rien, on est en train de perdre du temps. Donc la réponse, elle est écrite. Il vaut mieux que, voilà, qu'elle soit lue, non?
No, please explain your response in French first. For there will be French speakers listening, and I'm sure they'd prefer to hear it from you.
Parce que je ne sais pas, j'arrive pas à monter.
Okay, we'll just ask the captain to read the response.
Parce que je vais écrire, d'accord. Aujourd'hui, la question, depuis toujours, la question de la migration n'a pas été traitée d'une manière à ce qu'on puisse respecter les droits humains. Toujours, l'aspect sécuritaire a été l'aspect dominant du traitement de la question de l'immigration. Quand on pense que cette politique a échoué, il va falloir un jour mettre fin à cette politique. Si elle a échoué, ça veut dire qu'il faut changer de politique. Ça fait des années que la société civile dans nos pays appelle l'Occident et d'une manière précise l'Europe à adopter une autre politique. Il y a plusieurs volets. Il y a le volet de la prévention, c'est-à-dire comment faire en sorte que nos populations ne quittent pas leur pays. Comment faire en sorte qu'ils ne se sentent pas obligés de fuir la misère, de fuir l'injustice, de fuir les conflits, etc. Pour cela, la politique européenne a échoué dans la mesure où elle a toujours et elle continue toujours à soutenir des régimes despotiques, à soutenir des régimes corrompus et en plus encore l'Europe et l'Occident, d'une manière générale, est perçu dans nos pays comme des pays qui ne pensent qu'à leurs intérêts économiques, mais ils le pensent à court terme, c'est pas à long terme, parce que s'ils pensaient à long terme leurs intérêts économiques, ils n'encourageraient pas les États et les gouvernants à s'enrichir d'une manière illicite aux dépens de la population. S'ils pensaient à long terme, ils sauraient que soutenir un régime despotique, c'est ouvrir la porte à la migration clandestine. S'ils savaient, s'ils se rendaient compte qu'il fallait à un moment s'arrêter et mettre une politique de coopération, non seulement entre le Nord et le Sud, mais même au sein du Nord. Parce que quand on pense que les États européens se sont disputés les richesses dans des pays, au lieu de se mettre ensemble et dire comment établir une véritable coopération qui garantisse aux Européens leurs intérêts, parce que c'est légitime, les intérêts, personne ne peut dire que les intérêts des Européens ne sont pas légitimes, mais aussi garantir à la population le minimum de dignité, le minimum de confort et les libertés. Or, malgré tous les efforts et les tentatives, il n'y a pas une stratégie claire de la part de l'Europe pour prévenir la question de la migration. Aujourd'hui, tout le monde subit, bien sûr l'Europe la première, puisqu'elle est la première responsable, donc elle est la première, elle doit trouver des solutions, elle doit aussi ouvrir la porte pour recevoir les personnes qui sont dans des situations de réfugiés, qui ont toutes les conditions pour être des réfugiés dans les pays européens, mais le plus important, c'est de réfléchir une politique globale, une politique qui, en même temps, garantisse aux populations aujourd'hui, quand elles sont dans le circuit de la migration, le minimum de dignité, mais surtout travailler sur le long terme. Aujourd'hui, garantir les mêmes chances pour l'éducation, pour la santé, pour le droit au travail, c'est un minimum auquel doit aspirer n'importe quel être humain là où il est, mais on ne peut pas garantir cela quand ces États sont corrompus, quand les gouvernants s'enrichissent d'une manière illicite, avec la complicité des Européens, sinon, disons, même si ce n'est pas de la complicité, avec la complaisance. Donc, il y a deux choses. Il y a ce qui doit être fait d'une manière urgente, régler au maximum les situations des êtres humains, mais réfléchir à une autre politique. Parce que les droits humains, ce n'est pas seulement parce que c'est un droit naturel qu'on doit respecter les humains, parce qu'aussi la culture des droits humains, c'est une culture, si elle est propagée, si elle est largement intériorisée, c'est aussi une manière de prévenir et la migration, et l'extrémisme, et le terrorisme. Donc, le jour où on aura une approche globale et claire des droits humains, non seulement comme protection des êtres humains, mais aussi comme une partie intégrante de la politique préventive, aussi bien contre la migration, mais aussi contre des phénomènes graves, à savoir l'extrémisme et à savoir le terrorisme, peut-être qu'on aura mis fin à la migration, du moins, disons, à la migration non organisée. Et désolé, ça n'a rien à voir avec ce qui a été écrit. Hein.
No, no, it's fascinating.
There is a very difference between what I write, what I said.
It was a very passionate response. So dignity and long-term strategy. Would you mind translating, Captain? Or reading the shorter response?
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Madam Bakra. So I think we figured out at this end the confusion over the questions, and my high school French may assist me in putting together the answers that we have prepared. So first, to answer the initial question, and then to circle back and include the extra elements that Madam Bakra spoke about. So, of course, balance is possible when Europe knows that it is in its medium and long-term interest to ensure respect for the human rights of its populations, but also to guarantee equal opportunities in all areas, starting with education, to ensure better governance, and to guarantee the populations their dignity as well as justice. In relation to what extent should we be concerned about human rights violations? As the situation in these countries has returned to the same or worse than before 2011, we can only worry about the human rights situation. Today, all rights are threatened, starting with the right to security. Governments in these countries are constantly pitting human rights against each other. Peace, security against freedom, development against democracy. And so what is the situation in the migrant centers in Libya and Niger, facilitated by the money of the European Union? Unfortunately, it has been proven that these centers are the places of all human rights abuses. Some compare them to concentration camps in full view of the international community, installed in areas of conflict and suffering the consequences. The medium-term solution is first in the countries of origin of migrants who flee war, injustice, and misery and despair of a better future at the risk of their lives. Europe is perceived as responsible for the conflicts, but also as an accomplice of the bad governance of these states and profiting from the wealth and encouraging the illicit enrichment of the rulers and anxious to close its borders without caring about the populations who risk their lives. In the immediate future, and in order to save these thousands of people, the great powers must assume their responsibility by ensuring the safety of these migrants, by putting these camps under the control of the United Nations and authorizing humanitarian organizations to visit them, giving people the choice to return home or to obtain refugee status in European countries, and above all, organizing rescue operations. Of course, this seems utopian in the face of the rise of populism, but Europe has failed so far to manage the situation by prioritizing security. Hopefully that covers the main element of your response.
Thank you. I'd like now to circle back to something that Vincent Cochetel drew in on, but to bring in Emanuela Claudia Del Rey, the EU Special Representative for the Sahel, about the wider regional consequences for the Mediterranean troubles. Emanuela Claudia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. How far do problems in the Mediterranean originate in other countries in sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel? And what can be done in those fields?
Well, actually, I've been listening very carefully to the previous speakers, and I think that because I represent the European Union, of course, I am obliged to reply, especially to the solicitations that Ms. Bokra has just made on the role of the European Union in the field of security.
Please to give us your response.
Sorry?
Yes, absolutely. Please to give us your response.
Yes. I'm about to. Give me the time. I want to respond because I think that, in fact, there are aspects of the policy of the European Union regarding the issues in the Mediterranean that are still to be somehow adjusted to the current situation that changes day by day. But in the whole, I think that there are very important political points that can be made, which are related to the new vision of the European Union, and are points that I think will definitely move a step forward from what she described as the prioritization of security over other issues. I have to tell you that regarding the Sahel, and talking about the Sahel is fundamental in this sense, because the Sahel is the true southern frontier of Europe, as I usually describe it, because all the issues are starting from there, but also arriving there and then departing again to go to Europe through the different routes that have been mentioned. Well, the European Union has developed a new strategy for the Sahel that is based on the concept of mutual accountability, for instance, between the countries of the Sahel. And I interpret this concept of mutual accountability as an accountability between us, the European Union, and the Sahel, which also means in a larger sense, of course, the countries of Maghreb and also the countries of the Western Africa in general, also towards Eastern Africa. This mutual accountability is very important. And the other very important keyword is governance, because it is clear that there are immense security problems. In fact, the European Union is offering a solution or an approach or a methodology that I find interesting, because it is based on an integrated approach, on the view, for instance, of cooperating with the countries of the Sahel in terms of security. We have a mission, the EUTM, which is devoted exactly to the formation of the military in view of creating the opportunities for the countries themselves to be able to own their own destiny, also in terms of security. We also have UCAP, for instance, which is another mission for the police, and also for the reform of the judicial system, that is also devoted to the fact that we want ownership on the part of the Sahelian countries in order for them to resolve their security issues. But we also focus incredibly very much on the concept of governance, because the governance is the basic issue that is faced by all the countries of the region, and also this has an impact, of course, on the northern part and the southern part of the Sahel, because governance means that the state is not able to provide the necessary basic services to the population. It's not capable of creating good connection between the most remote areas and the center of the countries. And of course, in terms of migration, it means that sometimes it's complicated to manage, considering that the most significant routes of migration are between the countries of Sahel. They are transversal, south to south, not really south to north. Regarding the policy of the European Union, has it been effective? It has been effective. We have really saved a lot of lives. There are programs that are devoted exactly to intervening for the persons. And I have to say that the new strategy is centered on the concept of person. Human security is fundamental. And what we are trying to implement is the nexus between security and development. Unfortunately, I want to tell my friends, people who are listening, that security have just come from a long mission in Mali and in Cameroon for the Lake Chad. Security emerges as the most important thing, because even humanitarian aid, if you don't have security, you cannot provide it. So we cannot come out of this syndrome, but at the same time, we can make sure that we move on two tracks. One is security and the other one is development, and they have to go in parallel. I can't hear you.
We'll certainly come back to security, but drawing on what you've said about the EU's people-centered approach, at this point, I'd really like to bring in Marwa Mohammed, the head of advocacy and outreach, Lawyers for Justice in Libya. Do you agree that the approach of the international community in the Mediterranean is people-centered? What concerns would you have about the approach of the international community as far as human rights are concerned?
Thank you, Hannah. I think that with the situation, I mean, we look at the situation in Libya, for example, as the explanation of that question, and I think that that answers itself. The situation for migrants and refugees inside of Libya today is quite dire, and so I would very largely question how security or people's security is kind of placed at the forefront in a country that has been in conflict on and off for the past decade. We know the situation in Libya is there's a security vacuum. Within that security vacuum, there's been an economic crisis, and within that context, we've seen the emergence of trafficking and smuggling networks to such an extent that that operate to such an extent that in what was it, in 2016, I think the Chatham House study saw that the revenues from human trafficking and smuggling amounted to 978 million, which is 3.4% of Libya's GDP that year. That's very telling in itself. And so within that context, the situation has deteriorated even further. Even with the ceasefire today, we still have a country that is largely struggling with its own security situation. Militias run rampant through the country. They operate with complete impunity, targeting groups like the migrants and refugees as a vulnerable population. And in fact, I would like to highlight at this point in time that the fact-finding mission for Libya, which was established by a Human Rights Council resolution in June 2020, just submitted their report, published their report on the findings of their investigation on Monday. And I'd like to just quote this, their findings, as it is very, very telling. The mission established that since 2016, some 87,000 migrants have been intercepted by the Libyan Coast Guard and returned to Libya. There are currently around 7,000 migrants in DCIM detention centers. There is reasonable grounds to believe that the acts of murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, persecution, and other inhumane acts committed against migrants form part of a systematic and widespread attack directed at this population in furtherance of state policy. As such, these acts may amount to crimes against humanity. That is a very, very heavy reality that is not being put into consideration when policies around the Mediterranean are put in place. The situation in Libya is not conducive to have people returned, intercepted and returned. And within that context, people should not be returned. If security was in fact at the forefront, or people's security was at the forefront of policies, people should not be returned at this moment to Libya within this context.
So what would a more human, people-centered approach look like?
A more human-centric approach would be, first of all, providing alternative channels for that kind of movement. And I think I'd like to highlight here as well is that, and I think that my colleague, that this was touched on with regards to the human rights situation, but also Vincent did touch on this earlier about the asylum and situation in Libya. It's UNHCR's operations are highly restricted. It is unable to carry out its full mandate. What that means is that individuals are not able to seek asylum on personal grounds, on individual grounds. The Libyan authorities recognize certain nationalities, so asylum and refugee status is profiled based on certain nationalities. UNHCR's operations and its own presence is very precarious in the country without an MOU. So there are certain factors that definitely need to be put in place in Libya before allowing for returns or even recognizing Libya as a safe place of disembarkation. And several of these is the end of systematic arbitrary detention. There has to be a legal oversight over these. There has to be a security situation and that allows for the respect of human rights of the individuals. There has to be a system and the restoration of the rule of law in the country that allows individuals to seek justice or protection from the state, which is currently not the case. There has to be a system that allows UNHCR to operate in its full mandate in order to allow for asylum seekers to seek protection before giving the option of assisted voluntary return. There has to be alternative channels for departure as well. Other ways currently with this disembarkation and securitization system, people are trapped in a country where they face what the fact-finding mission has now stated potential may amount to crimes against humanity. And so we need to look at alternative ways for to ensure the security and safety of people, and that would be a human rights approach to this situation.
I'd really like to go back to Emanuela Claudia Del Rey now, and would see if you'd like to respond to this question about the legitimacy of returning people to Libya, where Marwa says they face crimes against humanity and have no right to asylum. And then we'll go on to the security situation.
Well, actually, I come from a country which is the only country, Italy, that has been doing evacuations from Libya. We evacuated people because of the situation in Libya, and therefore I'm very proud of it, because there is a high level of awareness of this. Of course, the issue of returnees is very debated. I have to say that it will be something on which we will have to work in the future. I think that the level of awareness is very strong, but there are also, unfortunately, still side elements that have to be approached. The real problem in general in these issues is the fact that there is a hierarchy of needs and interest every time something occurs, such as a conflict or an emergency, and this is why we cannot really somehow rationalize completely our integrated approach. The European Union, as I mentioned, as an integrated approach, we strongly believe in it. But as I said, it depends on the contingent situation. I dream of a moment in which we will have the opportunity to rationalize completely and work on the different tracks parallelly to obtain a good result. For the moment, I have to say that the issue of returnees is high in the priorities of the countries of the Sahel. For instance, I think that the concept of voluntary return is starting to deep into the minds of the governments, and I think we discussed it in the Lake Chad meeting of the governors the other day, because I was in Cameroon to discuss this, and I think this is an element that tells us that we can work in the right direction. Nevertheless, as I mentioned, the problem is how can we overcome the problem of always having to face emergency, as it has been mentioned, and start giving structural responses, which are not coming strongly because of the emergency and because of the security issue.
Yeah, several panel members have now made the point that to establish human rights, you require stability and security, something which is missing in Libya. What role can the EU play, Emanuela Claudia Del Rey, to stabilize the security? And what are the challenges for a group of 27 countries to intervene? How would they even find agreement on a kind of military intervention or political intervention?
Yes, I must say that when we talk about the European Union, we talk about 27 countries. Some countries are more sensitive for a number of reasons to the issues of the African issues and the Mediterranean and the Sahel. However, when a strategy is decided, it is really the voice of 27 countries, which means that there is a sort of a strong unity in the vision that is promoted at international level, and in particular in partnership with the countries of the Sahel, and of course in the general, more general, group of countries around the Sahel itself. I want to tell you that this choral approach is very much centered on security, as I said, and of course there are issues that are particularly sensitive. Migration is very important, and therefore, of course, reinforcing the protection of civilians and human security is a strategic priority of any intervention in the Sahel. How do we apply? Which methodology do we use? Of course, we have to prioritize objectives and actions to ensure the civilians to be better protected, and including, of course, the most vulnerable groups such as children, women, persons with disabilities, members of minority groups, the displaced persons, because don't forget that there are a huge number of IDPs and as well as refugees, also suspects and detained persons, because the issue of human rights is definitely quite wide and applies to a number of different people and migrants, of course. So we have to reduce the exposure to violence and abuses that are committed by different actors. We know very well that the actors are also part of the system of some countries, and this is why we want to prevent definitely the abuses by, of course, enhancing the mandate of our missions. In particular, I mentioned UTM, which is the European Training Mission in Mali, which is very much activated, which is very much concentrated on human rights and on forming a sense of use of military, not only, of course, to intervene in combat, but also as a part of the society for protection. This is why myself, I strongly believe, somebody mentioned Afghanistan, I also know the case of Afghanistan very well. I think that CIMIC, that is the civil-military collaboration, is absolutely fundamental, and I myself, I'm really promoting it as much as possible. So, of course, we have to promote as much as possible and encourage the political dialogue between all the political actors. It's not easy, but we have to do it also because we hope that in the future we should be able to solve problems such as, for instance, the disarmament of non-state armed groups. This is something that is called the DDR. We have to go because we have to do it very well, because the militias are something that are worrying and must be reintegrated into society. We have to strengthen the security sector reform because it is a way of restoring the population trust. The trust is completely lacking in the population towards government institution, and also we need to recapture the control in local agro-rural communities. So just to conclude, I have to say that Europe is not only intervening with the missions that are really effective. Consider that EUTM has already formed more than 18,000 soldiers in Mali, for instance, but there are many other missions in the region, of course. And consider also that we promote dialogue as much as possible. My role as a mandate that implies a huge amount of different dossiers, such as the peace process in Mali, as well as other processes, and of course all the security and development related issues. So we need to have a positive view despite all the huge problems. We need to be projected into the future with a sense of ability to intervene. Otherwise, we continue talking about the same things forever, and I think it's about time we move a step forward.
Yeah, now we've got some questions from our audience. Just sticking with Emanuela for a second. How does the wider Sahel instability affect Libya, and what can the EU do to deal with these challenges?
Well, I have to say that they are interdependent, of course, as you very well know, because we know very, very well that when Gaddafi fell, that there has been a lot of instability and a lot of collaboration also between Libya and the parts of Sahel in terms of course, armed groups and the jihadi groups. So they are completely interdependent. There is a fear that there would be more instability, and this is why we are intervening so strongly, because we are aware of that as European Union. But as I said, we want to make sure that the countries of the Sahel are able to react by themselves, because we act on a principle of ownership, so to speak, African solutions for African problems. And this is why, of course, we are insisting in accompanying the process. We are not imposing. We are working in partnership, and this is why we call the countries partners. The risk is very high when there is no reference at the government level, and this is why we have to work very much for a good governance, because when there is a good governance, we don't allow armed groups, because I say armed groups because they are various personalities. They are criminals, they are somehow jihadi with the different shades, of course. Sometimes there are groups that are improvise their will to control certain things, but the most dangerous thing is that they propose to the communities, the local communities, an alternative welfare. And this is why we have really to work very much on governance to make sure that we provide a proper governance, that the countries of Sahel provide a proper governance, so the people are reassured and the social contract is reestablished. We are fully aware of the risks between the different regions of Sahel, but just to tell you, being in Cameroon until yesterday evening, I can tell you that Boko Haram, for instance, is another huge thing, and of course it's all interconnected. Even in that case, we have to intervene on governance as well, of course, as on security.
Thank you very much. We actually have another question from the audience for Marwa about the Libyan elections. What expectations does Libyan civil society have towards the elections? And how do you assess the level of women's involvement in the electoral process?
Okay. So I'll contextualize this within our larger topic and not to take this into a different discussion entirely. But I think that within the overall situation in Libya, yes, there has been a ceasefire that now it still holds. We are quite concerned with the way this will develop over the next few months. We have been monitoring as an organization, Lawyers for Justice, for the past since June around what the environment needs to be in order for free and fair elections, which is ultimately, it's not just elections that we want to see, but we want to ensure that these elections are free and fair. There are main concerns that continue in terms of the shrinking of civic space. There has been an attack on civil society, restrictions on civil society's ability to engage. And we all know that civil society is vital to any democratic process. We rely on civil society to take us through the elections process. And so this is one of the areas that we as an organization are really trying to raise awareness on the restrictions that the current and previous authorities have placed on civil society, restricting their ability to engage with any foreign entities, with embassies, with other civil society organizations, which also restricts their fundings, and that again. And then obviously we go back to the overall larger security situation and how women, the women's role in participating in the elections, be it running as candidates or voting. The protection space for women is not is still a main concern. We've seen over the past years, since 2014, with the assassination of Salwa Bugagis, up to date with Hanan, the assassination of Hanan earlier this year, of how the violence against women online translates into a real physical violence on the ground. Again, given the security vacuum in the country, and the prevailing environment of impunity, without accountability, without justice, we question. We are concerned with the elections, the role of women and their ability to participate freely in civil society and any opposing voices freely. So this situation, and I just want to kind of bring it back into to the migrant situation, is prevalent in Libya. There is very much a vulnerability amongst the refugee and migrant population, but this is also part of a much larger context that exists in Libya in terms of attack on women, civil society, journalists, enforced disappearances. It's across the spectrum.
We can't hear you, Anna.
Thanks. Can you hear me now? Yeah, we've got more questions coming in from the audience. This is for both Emanuela and Vincent. With recent Afghanistan events in mind, the perception of the efficacy of the international intervention is being questioned in many tables. With reference to the Sahel, EU and different countries and organizations are still investing considerable resources in security and development. How do we balance that negative perception with the need for security in that area? And what can we do to hold governments in that area accountable for their management of foreign aid? Vincent, would you like to jump in on any of that?
Yeah, I think the question is more for Emanuela, but I can say that no, but definitely it's important. But when you hear the local population, you know, they talk about security. If some of the population in the Sahel are turning to some of the jihadist group for their protection, it's because locally sometimes they solve conflict in places which have been neglected by the states, in the remote area of Burkina Faso, Mali. You know, you have those armed group, terrorist group, which are providing protection, settling dispute in terms of access to water, to grazing lands, complicated family feud. So they are filling a vacuum, and we've seen that in northeast Nigeria before in the caliphate that the armed group have established since 2014. So we need to make sure that this overbidding in terms of protection services that they can offer is not misread by the population, and that's why the state, the local authorities, needs to be engaged, and the community needs to be brought in that dialogue. But we need to address first the protection needs of the population. I just like, maybe not on the Sahel, but on Libya, a little maybe nuance I'd like to introduce. I think we should not overestimate today the leverage that Europe has on the situation in Libya. I'm not talking about the oil companies. I'm talking about governments. The leverage is limited, much more limited than it has ever been, which translates into the focus of European states at this stage is more on political stabilization, making sure the elections happen. And the majority of EU states are not so much concerned about migration management from Libya at this stage. They have other priority, the Afghans, what has happened at the Belarusian, Polish or Belarusian Lithuanian border, instrumentalization of migration flows by some other countries. Unfortunately, this translates in leaving Italy, Spain to some extent, on Malta, without much solidarity on that file. So it's important not to drop it. It's important to think that the conflict that Emanuela talked about in the Sahel, including Cameroon, have an impact. They create a lot of south-south movement, but they have an impact in terms of movement to North Africa, and for some of them across the sea. So we need to look at the root causes, and we should not disengage in that complex nexus, security, development, humanitarian interventions, as well as migration management.
Thanks. So yeah, we shouldn't disengage. Emanuela, how do you react?
Well, I react by saying, first of all, that Afghanistan was mentioned. We must not be distracted by Afghanistan. Of course, Afghanistan is a huge issue. We all have spent a very difficult August because we were busy with the the emergency deriving from the recent events, but we must not be distracted in Africa, and in particular in the region of the Sahel, by this, because it is true that there are connections. Some people have dared to make similarities and parallels between, for instance, Mali and the situation in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of part of the French mission Barkhane, which made people think, well, the French are leaving the country, which is not true at all. But anyway, we must not be distracted because the situations are completely different. I have to say that this is what I call the hierarchy of interests, meaning there is a moment in which we are very much focused on a specific issue, are moments in which instead we are focused on another. The problem, and Mr. Cochetel, Vincent was right about it. At the moment, we should be able to act on parallel issues at the same time. This is not easy at all. The European Union is still concerned very much with the migration issues. The problem is that I have to say that the flows have diminished, and therefore the sense of emergency and what some extremists call invasion, which I of course don't agree at all, is not anymore and felt as something really pressing on our borders. Of course, every time there is an election, this will return in the different member states as a way of ideologizing the specific issue. But the problem for us is now, especially in the Sahel, and I think that there is the potential, because the European Union has a huge leverage in the Sahel, to start thinking about legal pathways for migration, and especially alternatives to illegal migration that would start not only from the understanding the root causes and tackling the root causes, but also providing opportunities such as, for instance, circular migration, just to mention one and not wanting to be too long. So, of course, hierarchy of interest, which really respond to the contingent situation, which is not acceptable, because we must continue intervening on the different dossier with the same intensity. And on the other way, anyway, especially for the European Union, who use its leverage to promote a step forward and to be contemporary in the response by providing alternative pathways, which must be legal and offer opportunities. Because for us to have legal migrants is an opportunity, and we have to start thinking in this way.
Yes, absolutely. Europe needs migrants more than ever, especially with falling birth rates. We now have a question for Emanuela and Vincent again. I'd be grateful if you provide a bit of context, because not everyone might be familiar. How could international organizations such as the EU and the UN strengthen the process of disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, DDR, and the security sector reform, SSR, in Sahel and Libya? So if you could give us a bit of context to start, that would be great. Emanuela?
Because you said Emanuela and Vincent, so I didn't know who was going to answer. Okay, yes, I mentioned the DDR before. These are problems that have been ongoing in many countries, unfortunately, where conflicts have been, somehow imposing themselves on the population. As for the Sahel, as I told you, of course, we have to do more, but because there are already protocols, there are already actions for disarmament, which have been put in place by the states themselves. The problem is the reintegration into society of the former members of the militia or armed groups, non-state armed groups, of course. There are protocols, as I said, we are working on it, and we shall try to do as much as possible. Strengthening security sector reform for the European Union is very important because it's, as I said before, it is a way of also creating a new system of trust between the population and the armed forces. consider that after episodes of abuses by security forces, for instance in Burkina and so on, there isn't a strong trust between the population and security forces, also police forces, for instance. And this is why we really have to insist in recreating this situation. And this is why we have our missions on field, which are missions devoted specifically to training. Why training? Because we believe that by working together and transferring our own experience and model, which has been working so far in our countries, because there is a trust between the population and the security forces, we can build together a new concept of security, which is perceived as a system of protection of individuals. And this also helps the population to cooperate with the security forces. Otherwise, if the population is afraid or doesn't trust the security forces, of course, it's very difficult also to have a collaboration to contrast armed groups, terrorists, and other things. It's very, very important that we act on this in this sense. I made it short, but it's much more complex.
Thank you. Vincent, would you add anything to that?
Oh, very quickly. I mean, demobilization is one aspect, and that has to be part of the dialogue on the offer with some of the armed group, but it has to come also with reconciliation, with justice. So it's difficult. As Marwa said, in the context of Libya, we have many armed actors, and even if we get rid over time of the foreign mercenaries that have been sent by some countries, we still have a lot of armed groups that are not going to relinquish the power that they have, because at the end of the day, it's the criminal business and enterprise that they control that matters to them. And they are reinvesting the proceeds of those criminal business into the legitimate economy, which makes it complicated because some local communities look at them as service providers. So we have to create that alternative legal and clean economy and get those militia out of the sort of business in which they are involved. So, we can put the blame on foreign mercenaries. That's one thing. It won't solve all the problems in the context of Libya.
Thank you. And the next panel will be talking about human security. So we have a question foreshadowing that debate for Emanuela. What can the EU do to enhance human security in Libya and the Sahel? What lessons learned can we draw from the past?
Well, lessons learned are based on the fact that we have an experience in working together with the countries of the Sahel and of the region in general. But our experience, unfortunately, enhances the fact that some of the measures and programs that have been put in place didn't succeed because of the lack of integrated approach, I find. At the moment, the new vision of the European Union in particular is the concept of working in a true partnership. Consider that this concept of partnership is not something to be underestimated. I often describe it as a sort of cultural revolution in the European Union, because passing from calling the countries of the Sahel and also of other areas, third countries, developing countries, to calling them partners, is a cultural revolution in my view. And this means that there is a different political will, which is very centered on the idea that we have to cooperate in all areas, in all aspects. Of course, this is at the derivation of also the awareness of having some interest, because for us the interest is stabilization, the interest is control of migration in terms of illegal migration, of course. This is why, of course, being moved by the interest, we have a particular impulse in trying to solve the problems. But at the same time, if we put the situation upside down and look at it from another perspective, it also means that finally we work together with the civil society continuously. We work together with international organizations. And one example is very striking, I find, for instance, in Niger, where we have programs which include civil society, international organizations, UNHCR knows very well, IOM and others. Also member states with their own institutions, because, for instance, if you want to intervene on migration, you have to have the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs working with you. And this means that the communities and obviously the migrants are also an actor. In these systems, we see that there is an integrated approach with the dialogue which is transversal at all levels, including all actors. That is the solution for the future. In Libya, it's not easy because, as you know, it's also a country which is going through a very complex phase at political level. But we are also involved there very, very much because we want to, of course, start considering the idea of including, for instance, the Fezzan and other areas which are sometimes not completely included in the dialogue. We want to make sure that the actual discussion regarding specific issues and the measures that are taken are actually reflecting the perspective of all the parts in the story. And I think that this is a good sign.
Hannah, I think your mic is muted.
Thank you so much, Emanuela. Yeah, I have to close this panel now. I think we didn't always find complete agreement between the panelists. The solutions are extremely complex. Perhaps we can agree on that we don't disengage. But thank you, all of you, for a very thoughtful and heartfelt debate on a topic that's extremely crucial to security and human dignity in Europe and everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and to all the speakers for this fascinating discussion and debate, which is, of course, crucial if we are to develop our perspectives. So that concludes our second panel discussion. We are running a little ahead of time, so we will now take a break for lunch and resume at 14:30 hours, which is just over 2 hours from now. Enjoy your lunch, and we will. Okay, so unfortunately, one of our speakers is having difficulty joining, but I think that we should start and hopefully they'll be able to join us in the middle of the conversation. So welcome back to the second part of the first day of ShadeMed 2021. Let's proceed with panel 3, where we will discuss cornerstones of a viable Mediterranean strategy for sustainable economic recovery and prosperity. This panel's moderator is Rim Berahab, Senior Economist at the Policy Center for the New South in Rabat, Morocco. A final reminder for everyone, each time you would like to speak, please make sure that your microphone has been activated. Please, Rim, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the third panel of this year's Shared Awareness and Deconfliction in the Mediterranean Conference under the theme Sharing Security, Culture and Values for Shared Prosperity in the Mediterranean. Organized, of course, by the EUNAVFOR Med and the NATO Allied Maritime Command. I am very delighted to be here with you today and be your moderator. So our panel is titled From Crisis to Opportunity, the Cornerstone of a Viable Mediterranean Strategy for Sustainable Economic Recovery and Prosperity. As you know, the world is witnessing rapid changes in the geopolitical and economic spheres, and the energy field has also undergone significant development, which brings out several opportunities in the Mediterranean countries. These opportunities, of course, include discovering new deposits of conventional raw materials and the development of alternative energies in the perspective of progressive global decarbonization. And from a logistical point of view, the Mediterranean should also aim at greater economic integration to strengthen itself as a fundamental macro-logistical area in the international transport system. And in this context, strengthening economic ties and social cooperation with other partners such as the EU is crucial, particularly in research and innovation, in order to empower the women and youth, supports public-private partnerships, and foster regional integration. So to discuss these issues, I am being joined by an incredible panel that I am pleased to welcome. So we have with us Mr. Amjad Ahmed, who is Director and Resident Fellow of Empower Me at Atlantic Council. We also have with us Ms. Roberta Boniotti, Secretary General of MEDENER, the Mediterranean Association of National Agencies for Energy Management. We are also delighted to have with us Mr. Lapo Pistelli, Director Public Affairs at ENI, and Mr. Guy Platen, Secretary General International of the Chamber of Shipping. So over the next 45 minutes, our distinguished panel will have what I hope will be a very robust discussion about the new opportunities for sustainable development and economic recovery in the Med region. So we will have 2 rounds of questions. During each round, speakers will be given about 5 minutes to present their point of view. So that will be a total of approximately 10 minutes at the end of the 2 rounds. And following the presentations, we will then open the floor for discussion with the audience for about 15 minutes. So without any further ado, I am turning to Mr. Ahmed. So given your experience, what is your take on the rise of entrepreneurship and women's economic inclusion in the Mediterranean region?
Well, thank you, and it's great to join everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So the Empower Middle East initiative at the Atlantic Council focuses very much on several pillars. The first is empowering entrepreneurship. The second is empowering women economic participation. And last but not least is empowering the private sector. And the reason we focus on those issues is because the way we see the world is there's a marketplace, and it's a two-sided marketplace. And the problem has been that in the last 10 years, we've been focusing very much on programs purely focused on youth in terms of their development, in terms of programming. So there's lots of programming out there to try to educate and improve youth. And we've seen a lot of progress in terms of women education in the last 10 years. But there's been a lack of the other side of the marketplace, which is the creation of jobs. The reality is that you can work very hard on youth issues and women issues, but there are not enough jobs out there, then it really doesn't matter. Actually, you create a more cycle of frustration than anything else. So what are the outlets to spurring that other part of the equation? It's really the private sector. Governments can no longer withstand, even governments in the Gulf can no longer withstand the employment rates required to keep all of these youth that are coming to the workforce engaged. So the lack of igniting the private sector has been a fundamental problem. We need more creation of companies, and we need more companies to scale. How do you do so? We see entrepreneurship as a fundamental route to creating those companies. You need to liberalize, you need to open up the market, you need to create opportunities for new companies to be created. The second part of that equation is how do companies scale? And you mentioned economic cooperation and integration. Many of the countries of the Mediterranean and the wider Middle East are fairly small economies. Even the large ones are fairly small economies in the context of the globe. So to create more economic activity on the private sector, you really need to work on integration, opening up your borders, allowing for companies to scale regionally. And that takes a lot of effort from the government to create bilateral agreements with Europe, with the rest of the region, with other parts of the world, to allow these entrepreneurs to tap into the global supply chain in many ways. So I think the marketplace today is broken. And that equilibrium is a must for us to succeed going forward. I think you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. So what I recall from it is really what is important to do now is to create more companies, which hence the important role that entrepreneurship has now, and again how to scale up these companies. And I also noted the important role that the private sector shall play in this area. So I am now turning to Ms. Bognotti. So I understand that the Medener approach is based on common dialogue and multilateralism and regional cooperation principle. And it also participates in different types of emblematic projects carried out in the Med region. So can you tell us more about this project and also about Medener's commitment to the energy transition in particular?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'm honored to represent today at the Shade Med conference, the Medener Association. It's the Mediterranean Association of National Agencies for Energy Management. We are, in a glimpse, 13 national energy agencies, and we are in total more than 1,000 experts in different sectors from energy to environment. And with regards to your question, I will focus my answer on the two last projects that we have, the MITMED 1 and MITMED 2 projects that are related to mitigation, enabling energy transition in the Mediterranean region. The first project started in 2018 and until 2020, and this one, the second one, is currently running, starting on 1st January this year and will be running until 2024. What's the project's vision? Our vision is together we switch our motto, we switch to clean energy. Big countries from the northern and the southern shores of the Mediterranean aspire to implement concrete energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions in order to enhance their energy security and fostering the transition to a low carbon and climate resilient national economies. So our experts and the partners are sharing knowledge in order to build more stable, efficient, and competitive energy systems. It's important to consider two interrelated ways to respond to the project vision. And one is by improving governance, and the other is strengthening the market confidence. So activation of inclusive jobs, mobilization of sustainable investments. This is very important for the success of our projects. Good governance is a key component for implementing the energy transition. It is very important to involve the policymakers at the strategic level. And then a stronger market confidence is needed in the field of energy efficiency and renewable energy. And it means enhancement of legislative and regulatory frameworks, training the technical capacity, facilitation of the private sector involvement in order to improve energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions in the area. The MITMED projects also strive to strengthen local and national technical capacity. It is important to work both at local and regional and national level to develop more sustainable policies around the Mediterranean. In the first phase of the first project, we identified the specific bottlenecks to address. Main recommendations came from MITMED 1 about several sectors, the building sector, appliances, industry, transport, and also cross-sectorial topics. And the MITMED 2 project, the second one, decided to focus on the building for this moment, currently, for the building and appliances sector. In fact, due to a rapid demographic growth and urbanization in the target countries of the southern shores, the building sector is one of the largest energy consuming sectors that's responsible for more than 20% and up to 35% of the total energy consumption in the region. Also, appliances are one of the highest consumers in the Southeast Mediterranean countries due to specific nature of the weather conditions, but also to the unusual increase in energy consumption and the expansion of usage of the appliances within the last decades. So we are concentrated on the two sectors at the moment, but it will be important to tackle also the transport sector and industry sector. A key concern regarding the appliances is the low quality products in the local markets. So we have, with our projects, a wide ambition of obtaining a massive deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency measures in the sectors that are more energy intensive in the area, energy consuming, and particularly increasing public awareness on energy's major stakes and challenges and on the investments that are needed in the sectors.
Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. So you mentioned two components that I find very interesting to ensure the success of the switch to clean energy, so governance and strengthening market confidence, which I believe are two crucial components, not only in the energy sector, but to the improvement also of the economic integration of the Med region as a whole. So moving on to Mr. Pistelli. So I believe he had some difficulties to connect. So is he here with us?
I'm here, but with a different name.
Okay, very glad to see you here. Welcome. So, Mr. Pistelli, you have extensive experience at both the Italian and European Parliament, also in higher education and working with different think tanks, and of course with ENI, to cite just a few. So I would like to ask you about your take on the economic and geopolitical dynamics in the Med region, especially given that this region is a fundamental corridor of international maritime traffic and also an important energy hub.
Yeah, thank you, Rin, and thank you for inviting me. I'll spend my 5 minutes with, I would say, full 5 statements, my 50 cents of wisdom. The first one, as you mentioned, it's interesting to note that the sea is coming back as a natural space to project national interest, especially economic interest. As an Italian, I mean, this is true since all time because of the ancient Rome and Venice were well aware about the relevance of the sea as a geostrategic space. But coming back to the recent past, the British Empire was very aware of that. United States, and nowadays China. China, who is strongly scaling up its presence in the sea and in the oceans as a global presence. And that's my, would say, first statement. So you have to consider the sea as a natural political space to extend your national projection. The second one, what about the Med? We all know, and we keep repeating that the Med Sea is just 1% of the global water, but it's embracing something less than 20% of the global trade. So just this ratio between 1 and 20 gives you the economic relevance of the space. But looking at the Med, because if you want to talking geopolitically, you need to have always in front of you a Med. You will see that traditionally this has been the I would say the door connecting Europe and Africa, but you have to widen your perspective, and you see that this is becoming what we call the enlarged Middle East, because it's not only connecting the traditional North and South, so the South Europe and the North Africa, but it's connecting the Gulf, and the Gulf is connecting globally Asia and Europe. And so we need to change our perspective. We were used to see the Med Sea from north-south perspective, Europe to Africa. You have also to add a new perspective, which is east to west, because from Gibraltar to Suez, you are connecting the two oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. And this explains why, in this new geopolitical space, you have not only the traditional national actors being there, so Italy, France, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and all the national states who are facing the sea, but you have a number of regional powers coming back. Let's make the case of Turkey, which is posturing in a very, assertive way in the last 5-6 years. You have traditional powers who are looking at the Med since the 18th century, like Russia, but now you have also China being there, and not only for commercial reason, but also for political reason, establishing bases and looking for a hotspot to be there. So the third comment, it's clear that talking on behalf of ENI as a Director of Public Affairs of ENI, we are playing a pivotal role in the energy sector, because basically, not mentioning our Italian activities, but we are the first player in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Libya, in Egypt, and considering the licenses we have, also in Cyprus and in Lebanon. And so we have a wide range of connection with all governments facing the Med. I would like not to forget the Western Balkans, because we have stakes in Albania, in Montenegro. And so what is the issue? We were traditionally used to consider, how can I say, energy as a sector per se. That's true. Energy is a big economic sector per se, and the East Med has become one of the new big things in the last 10 years because of some discoveries that were done in the East Med basin. We are not talking about a game changer at the global level, but for sure we are looking at a game changer as a regional level, because all of the countries facing the Med would be able, on the one hand, to be self-sufficient in terms of energy, autonomous, and moving some of them from a very polluting and expensive energy mix that they have, fuel oil or diesel, importing and spending much of their national budget. Think about Lebanon. And on the other hand, we have to look at the energy not only as an economic sector per se, but also as a political tool for integration. And I would like to highlight, I would say, half of the success story, which is the East Med Gas Forum, where you have traditional actors having disputes in the past. Let's take the case of Israel and Egypt, which are now fully cooperating in the energy domain and embracing in their cooperation other minor, I would say, entities like Jordan and the Palestinian national authorities. But you still have energy as a divisive issue. So let's take the case of Egypt and Turkey, or Cyprus and Turkey, or Israel and Lebanon. So I think that in this, this is my final comment, in a time where the sea has gone back to its central stage, in which the blue economy and the global trade in the crossing the Med is so relevant, and in which we are looking and dealing with the transition from traditional energy to new energy, and we need that, and the countries of the south of the basin need to improve in the performance of renewable energies. There's a big space for political and economic maneuvering. I mean, we are talking about a sector that is booming, but I would like to combine together, because these are the two cornerstones of our political framework, not only the economic integration and cooperation between the North and the South, but also the political integration between the North and the South. Because let me tell you, this is not a final statement, but yes, it's a final statement. We are talking a lot about the energy transition in Europe. We have a Green Deal and so on. But I see a risk, and I'm scared by this risk, that because the energy the energy transition and the fight against global warming is a global one, is a global fight. As a European, what I fear the most is to have a conversation which is close into a bubble, And in this bubble, you have Europeans marching ahead at a high speed, and you have the southern countries of the basin lagging behind, with two conversations, one about new energies and the other one about old energies. And this is not helping also with political integration. So you need to reconnect either on political side or on the economic side, the two shores of the Med Sea, because this is a big opportunity and we don't have to transform it in a big obstacle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You made very interesting points, and you stressed the importance of the sea as an economic and political space that connects countries beyond the Med, and you also emphasized the role of energy as a political tool for integration. So last but not least, for this first round, I am turning to Mr. Platten. And we're going from a regional perspective to a more country-level perspective. So a recent study from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia showed that peace in Libya, if maintained, will produce enormous economic benefits, not only for Libya, but also for the whole Mediterranean countries. So what is your assessment as Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping to the role of maritime trade concerning such development? And what are the further prerequisites for such growth prospect in the South Med region?
Thank you very much. A real honor to speak to you all today. Just a little bit of background. The International Chamber of Shipping represents national ship owning associations across the globe, and collectively we represent about 80% of the world's fleet in all sectors and trades. I think it'd be fair to say shipping is the lifeblood of trade, and by extension the prosperity of society. As one Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization said, without shipping half the world would freeze and the other half would starve. 90% of all goods that are manufactured are transported at some point in their journey by sea. That's $14 trillion worth in value every single year. It's a strategically vital industry, and we can, as we know, and as has been said by other speakers, it's been demonstrated in the Mediterranean since really the dawn of civilization. But I would say I do want to mention the COVID crisis, because the last 18 months have put this strategic importance of shipping into stark relief. Throughout the crisis, shipping has ensured the continued flow of essential goods, even as borders closed and the movement of people and particularly seafarers was restricted severely. And so the crisis presented extreme difficulties for shipping, and that has in turn demonstrated the fragility of the trade lanes in ways that would not have previously been imagined. In the past 18 months, it's shown that shipping is a cornerstone to economic recovery, but that unforeseen events can severely affect it. There is no doubt it will be central to the recovery, the long-term prosperity of the Mediterranean and countries like Libya, but it must be recognised the potential for disruption must be mitigated against. Firstly, the insecurity in the littoral states has the potential to spill into the maritime sphere and impact shipping. Ongoing conflict creates uncertainty, and we've seen GPS spoofing of merchant ships. And sorry, my camera was off. I do beg your pardon. Sorry about that. Hope you can see me now. Yes. It's insecurity in little states, the potential to spill into the maritime sphere. We have seen GPS spoofing of merchant ships, and on some occasions military action against them. The insecurity has obviously manifested itself through mass migration across shipping lanes, and we're really proud of the tens of thousands of distressed people that our industry has rescued at the height of the migrant crisis. But there is some opportunities there. In shipping, as we move to a sorry, for some reason my camera goes off. As we move to a zero carbon future, and there's an opportunity for states, particularly in the Mediterranean, to become self-sufficient in the new greener fuels, the hydrogen-based fuels. And there is opportunity for those in economic growth and fuel security, but also in terms of opportunities in terms of employment. And that's really something to bear in mind as well. We're going to have to transport the lower density green fuels to places where it's needed, and that's going to require more shipping. And it's going to require highly skilled people in order to man those ships. So I think there's an opportunity, and you mentioned at the start as well about the opportunities for women. We are sadly underrepresented by women, and we've only got like 5-6%. So there's huge opportunities there. We can move to a more highly skilled maritime-based economy.
Thank you very much, and for your speech. And you really addressed the importance of shipping as a cornerstone of economic recovery post the COVID pandemic. Now, going back to Mr. Ahmed, so you gave us earlier an overview of the state of entrepreneurship and economic inclusion in the Med region. So, given the numerous changes happening now in both the economic and geopolitical spheres, what are, in your opinion, the macroeconomic trends that will impact the Mediterranean states in the future?
For me, when I look at the region and what's happening today, what we're seeing is the larger economies of Saudi, UAE, Egypt, even to a degree Turkey, are taking a lot of steps to try to ensure their national interests and national economies are expanding locally. There's a bit of recoiling to look more internal, given everyone has a lot of economic issues, specifically post-COVID, and we're still going through COVID, of course, but you're finding a lot of anxiety as to the impact of COVID and what it has done to the economy in a negative way going forward. So you're seeing a recoiling by a lot of the big economies today to look internally. However, when I look at what's on the bright side, is that they're recoiling in a way where they want to spur private sector activity locally. So their initial focus is on bringing down barriers, bringing down regulations to spur more opportunities, and as I said, more creation of companies. But the key to all of their success is regional integration. And I think to the degree integrating with the countries of the Mediterranean just makes the most sense in terms of obviously manpower, in terms of further opportunities of trade, as you said, opportunities in maritime as well as energy. So we go back to the fundamental question of how do you effectively integrate the region together to allow for more of an open market? And I think this has been a primary issue. So on the macro level, what we would like to see is countries to liberalize their borders so we can have further trade with goods, people, and capital. And I think we need to move away from the zero-sum game thinking that will impact you negatively versus positively in the long run. The other macro trend that I think is going to affect the region is the larger economies are also challenged. So that's going to impact capital flows globally, whether they're to the Middle East or any other country. So again, I think there's a big onus on regions to really look internally and say, how do we improve ourselves? Because a rescue package from outside is going to be very challenging. And I think you're going to see that going forward. I think the third macro trend is the decarbonization, which was mentioned. There's a lot of discussion about whether this is going to take 2 decades, 3 decades, 10 decades. But the reality is the trend is moving in that direction. We're seeing massive initiatives in alternative energy. We're seeing massive initiatives to decarbonize. We're seeing the world change in so many ways in terms of electrifying logistics. So there's no doubt that 10, 20 years from now, the world will look very different. Now, how that impacts the Middle East, of course, is that the largesse of the GCC is also being pulled back. In some ways, it's positive because politically they're becoming more less aggressive, which is positive. But it's negative in that they were funding a lot of investment around the region and a lot of opportunities. And again, I think they're going to look more inward for the foreseeable future until they get their economies in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are all very important trends. So, as you mentioned, despite the current difficult context with COVID and so forth, integration remains of utmost importance. But then it has to find a middle ground with the willingness of countries to keep looking internally. And also you mentioned the challenge of decarbonization, which is becoming more and more a reality and will pose several challenges, especially to countries of the region which are rich in conventional fossil fuels. Now moving back to Ms. Bognotti. So we spoke earlier about the current project of MEDNER, but if we look now at the future, how can MEDNER, in your opinion, foster regional integration in the Med region and improve capacity building and sharing knowledge?
Yeah, thank you for the answer. In the last few years, the attention to renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors has been constantly increasing in the Med region. And even if there are still many bottlenecks and difficulties, and in particular, we can say that there are strong growth trends in energy demand in the South Mediterranean countries. And there are also growing concerns of sustainable socioeconomic development and security of supply. So therefore, there's a great need for a common vision. And we base our observations on the scenario to 2050 produced by OME, Observatoire Méditerranéen de l'Énergie, which is preparing the Mediterranean energy model, as usual, which includes the two demand scenarios, the reference scenario and the proactive scenario. And we work on the data elaborated by OME. We can say that a near zero emission trend, there is a near zero emission trend in the region, but actually no full decarbonization for the South Mediterranean will be achieved by 2050 for sure. In any case, there are more renewable energy sources, more efforts in the energy efficiency in buildings and mobility, and also it is necessary to incorporate interconnections. In fact, we work with the regulators, Mediterranean regulators, and also with the transmission systems operator to improve the deployment of renewable energy sources. In this framework, MEDNER, together with all the other relevant stakeholders, contribute to the common vision by facilitating sharing of experience, know-how, best practices among its member and international partners. We have bilateral and multilateral cooperation, common projects that are aimed at accelerating the transfer of skills, methodologies, technologies for the energy transition. Our approach, as you said at the beginning, is based on common principles of dialogue, multilateralism, regional cooperation that's necessary to reach this common vision in the Mediterranean region. Of course, we aim at improving our knowledge, understanding, and to make knowledge largely available and turn it into concrete solutions, because this is important, not just knowledge and understanding, but also concrete solutions. We established the regional network of experts from all the countries, and they exchange knowledge, and they prepare the projects to be funded. For example, also in the current project, we are working at bankable projects in order to have a leverage effect also on the private investments. To conclude, to improve capacity building and sharing knowledge, it is fundamental to perform at two levels. At strategic and policy level, And the target are policymakers. We are national agencies, depending on the governments. Our objective is to improve harmonization, monitoring of legislations and regulations and standards in all the sectors. In particular, we'll be focusing on the building, but also we need to focus in other sectors, of course. And also by fostering exchanges, information, experiences between northern and southern countries' partners. In order to have for them a common, respecting the energy mix of all the countries, but a common view, a common vision for all the region. And then at implementation level, the other level where the target are local stakeholders, public authorities, technical experts, energy managers, and suppliers. So at implementation level, and very important, the general public, our objective is to promote renewable and energy efficiency through capacity building, training, and also awareness raising campaigns.
Thank you very much. We indeed are in need for a common vision. So for the sake of time, I will move directly to Mr. Pistelli. So building on what you said earlier, what are, in your opinion, the areas of future cooperation in the Med region, and how to address the current obstacles that are hampering this cooperation?
Okay, so first of all, we need to know that in the Med Basin, in terms of energy, you have traditional, long-time standing actors and newcomers. So I would position France, Italy, and Spain among the traditional actors in the northern part, and Egypt, which is the grandfather of the southern countries, is not only the big brother in the Arab world, but it's also a country in which the first exploration about energy happened in 1861. So 2 years after the first drilling of a well in the United States. Then you have countries which are more recent in this domain, but which are actually relying on energy in their economy. So you need to divide them with a number of criteria: newcomers and long-standing actors, big actors and small ones, because you can understand that also a mid-sized discovery can't be enough for a big consumer, but can be a lot for a small actors with enough energy for his domestic market and to export. So there's no one-size-fits-all. This is the first answer that I would like to give you. No one-size-fits-all. I think that I go again to the issue of the East Med, because the East Med provided us some, I would say, political recipes. On the one hand, the countries and companies who have a tradition of partnership and friendship has to, let's say, to provide their experience to the newcomers. So I think that what we have done as a country, as Italy, with Egypt, what we have done with Libya, has been so far a good, I would say, bedrock to build on. What we would like to say, I would say, to the policy makers, especially to all those policy makers who are living in the southern part of the basin, please take into account the lesson learned by Europeans after the Second World War about coal and steel. Coal and steel have been, I would say, the economic rationale for 2 world wars between France and Germany. And in a few years, they have grown up as the first common market of the next to be European Union. So please, it's not a very naive statement saying that energy can be a tool for integration. This is what happened to Europe. So you need to do that. Also because when you start from fulfilling your domestic needs in terms of energy, you also understand that there's a lot of human capital transfer, technology transfer. So it's a whole environment in which economies, energy, citizens are all growing. And if you see the success story, you see that this is happening concretely. This is happening. Unfortunately, I keep repeating that for those who to see themselves as excluded by the picture, or can be, or want to spoil the whole system, is very easy. So never forget that this is also a sea which is not anymore the Mare Nostrum of the ancient Romans, but is not. I'm sorry to say that it's not a sea with no disputes. We have a lot of disputes to deal with. A lot of maritime boundaries are not set. You have a lot of boundaries which are set politically, but no treaties have been ratified. So a lot of disputes about that. But the message that we can do as an energy company, we can't replace the role of the governments, is to say, look, this is a win-win game. This is a win-win game in terms of your economic development, in terms of improving your business environment, in terms of improving the human capital that you have. And you will see that at the end of the day, if you're able to step aside with your traditional national disputes, you will see that this liquid stage, the MED, and this particular bubble, which is energy, is going to provide you a lot of dividends. So it seems to me that something is happening. Just a final comment about one country that is a very troubled one, like Libya. Libya has been so many times on the eve to derail, you know. But at the end of the day, the big issue that they have, energy, and so the triangle, the national oil company, the national bank, the central bank, have been the safe box to preserve the unity of the country. If you split that safe box, you split the country. But they have been able to manage a low-intensity conflict for 10 years by always preserving their core economy. So I think that these are some of the lessons that the policymakers of the next century or this century should learn, because this is the only way to take a big opportunity from the factual basis that we have explained in this panel.
Thank you very much. These are very important lessons, as you mentioned, because these challenges are very difficult to address, but we still need to keep moving forward. Now back to Mr. Platten. So my final question for you would be, how do you assess the security situation in the central Mediterranean for commercial shipping, and what expectations do you have towards the EU in this regard?
It's trying to be brief, really. I mean, what we want in the central Mediterranean, and particularly is stability. And that's going to be really important for the economic development of the area, and just to get people, to lift people out of poverty, to get a sustainable future for all. I mean, the role the EU can play in that is obviously it's a big player and can place pressure strategically and politically to try and get that stability that we all crave. I mean, we need to see, as I say, that increased stability across the region to give shipping the confidence and freedom it needs to operate effectively, and it needs to remove unnecessary uncertainties that can be resolved by legal and humanitarian mechanisms. In the longer term, the change of the climate crisis, which we talked about today, will present economic opportunities for the whole Mediterranean states and the shipping industry alike. And being optimistic, if I can, to leave that, we can anticipate a future Mediterranean that is stable at its borders, which is central to the continued free flow of trade in a carbon-free economy. And as it always has been, will be driven by maritime trade and the opportunities that will present.
Thank you very much for your concise but very, very relevant answer. So I think that we can open the discussion now with our participants, and I see that we already have numerous questions. I'll start with one directed to Ms. Bognotti. So one of the questions that we received is, how will the Mediterranean population, in particular young generation and students, benefit from the Medner project's activities related to energy transition?
Thank you for the question. This is a really important point. Our ultimate ambition is to have economic growth, job creation, increasing public awareness about energy, climate, mobility, environmental issues. but especially towards the young generations for their future. We aim at contributing to accelerate the behavioral and lifestyle change that are required to get the zero pollution, sustainable energy, and resource-efficient economies and societies. I have just one small example to explain our work and our interest in new generations. That are demo actions about schools in the area, in the MeetMed2 projects. The energy consumption of public school buildings is very high, and it represents a fundamental point to be addressed for the future society. They grow, the young people grow in the buildings. School buildings are the first place where the men of the future learn to understand the importance of efficiency and energy saving. So we are developing some tools to have an impact, a standard methodology to be replicated at a larger scale, a tool that will be developed for energy management in the schools and provide guidance for renovation of schools. That's a very important topic for all the countries in the Mediterranean area. And also we will have energy solutions, storage, energy management systems. But at the same time, our importance is given to the children, to the students, and to the teachers. Our action is a technical action, but it's also linked to awareness raising by training teachers and particularly children, students that will be growing with the new principle of energy transition and resource efficiency.
Thank you. Thank you for your short but very clear answer. We also received a question addressed to Mr. Pistelli, and the question goes as follows. So how does the political and security turmoil affect any investment in Libya?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. But if you see what happened in the last 10 years, you will see that as a company, we never suffered any major disruption. So we had some small disruption in the oil crescent in the east part in Cyrenaica because of the control from military initiative from Haftar, but there were small and minor disruption. And why that? Basically for two reasons. The first one is that I'm not advertising ENI. I mean, it's a fact. We have a presence which dates from the 50s there, and so this is not a traditional explorer, drill, produce, and export. It's a connection with the local governments, with communities. So ENI has a wide network of relations in the country, and so every small village knows that they can rely on the ENI presence for every kind of need. The second issue is that the business model in Libya is basically based on providing gas to the domestic market. So we are producing small oil, but we are producing, I would say, 85% of the gas of the country. And basically, we are providing electricity to all of the country, north, south, east, and west. So it would be really something, I mean, it's like a sort of self-inflicting wound by cutting a relation with the ENI, because we are turning on the lights to Libya. And this was well understood by all political leadership after 2011. So we have been able to be there, to work there in a safe way. It's clear that when you have a relatively low stability in a country, ordinary maintenance and investment are lagging behind, are slowing down. And this is one of the messages that we are still giving to all political leaders in Libya, having a constant relation with them. So, okay, things are going, I mean, quite okay, but they could go much better. I mean, Libya could double or triple its production and becoming one of the gas hubs in the southern part of the basin, and this is a lost opportunity. But we as I told before, we can't replace the role of politicians. So we can just give some free advices, and that's it.
Thank you very much. I see that we have one last question addressed to Mr. Platten. So what lesson learned has the shipping industry drawn from the Suez Canal blockage? And are there ways to reduce the vulnerability of the Mediterranean regarding such blockages?
I think the Ever Given incident back in March of this year showed how vulnerable the overall supply chain is to these shocks. It was one ship blocking the canal for 6 days. It caused weeks and weeks of delays, and at one point I think well over 300 ships were waiting to transit, and that has a knock-on effect for trade. So shipping industry, I suppose we've always known about those vulnerabilities, but I think it's shown society at large that the supply chain is precious and vulnerable. And throughout the COVID crisis, the shipping has been resilient and kept the world going. But we only see the effects all around the world now of increased demand, constrained supply, and what's that's happening in terms of deliveries. So there's lessons to be learned there in terms of making sure the strategic waterways are free and open at all times, and also the alternatives we must put in place in order to make sure that shipping still flows. So I think they're the lessons we can draw from the Ever Given in the Suez crisis, just how fragile shipping supply chains are, and just how the model we've got at the moment needs to be seriously looked at to make sure it is resilient as we move post-COVID into the recovery mode.
Thank you very much. I know that this subject spurs many questions and many discussions, but unfortunately we're out of our time, and especially for this panel. But I know this is, as I said, a discussion that a lot of people are having, and I certainly hope we can continue this conversation beyond this conference. So I would like to take a minute to thank again our incredible panel. So Mr. Amjad Ahmed, Ms. Roberta Bognotti, Mr. Lapo Pistelli, and Mr. Guy Platten. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Rim, for moderating this panel, and thank you again to all the speakers for their invaluable insights, as well as to those who asked questions. We will now continue discussions in the 3 non-recorded working groups that will work on policy recommendations under Chatham House rules. If you registered for one of the working groups, you have received a link to enter the first of 2 sessions. The second session will begin tomorrow at 0900 hours. Enjoy these interesting discussions, and tomorrow you will meet my colleague, Commander Dara Kirwan, who will guide you through the day. Have a good evening.